Chapter 1719. Although the system supermarket had a bunch of useless things, sometimes they could find good things to save lives. If this plane completely locked on to the supermarket, Wei Bai felt that it was dangerous, because this was the first time she was facing the problem of whether or not to lock the supermarket. It was a useless problem. If she said lock it, she didn't know if there would be any side effects if she didn't lock it. If she said not to lock it, 100,000 defective products would definitely be good. Just as Wei Bai was in a dilemma, thousands of blood threads suddenly appeared in the array, covering the sky and earth. The blood threads pierced a ghost, and the ghost would let out a tragic cry. Some malicious ghosts quickly fled to the weak parts of the array and hid. Every time the array was activated, many malicious ghosts would die. The array required a huge amount of energy to activate. If the array determined that there were no super malicious ghosts, it would usually be in a half-stop state. The redness in Yumachian's eyes intensified. He raised his hand and grabbed his peachwood sword. Countless red tassels flew and exploded. Countless red tassels intertwined with the red blood threads. Those blood threads were entangled into a ball. They couldn't attack anymore. Yumachian quickly came to the edge of the array. This array was actually very powerful, but the strength of the person who activated it was too bad. So bad that this array could only maintain basic vigilance and basic attack power. If it was an expert, he would have the ability to completely activate all the power of the array. He was already in a sorry state now. Yumachian glanced at the simple yellow talismans outside the array. It was really hard to explain. It wasn't that the ancestor of the Imperial Path sect didn't leave behind anything good. Why was it that after being ruined by this group of juniors, the good things were like dog shit? Yumachian glanced at Bai Bai, who was still vomiting blood and lying on the ground. He couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. No wonder Wei Bai's aptitude was so good. In the end, she didn't know anything. With such a trash sect leader, she was lucky that she wasn't killed. How could they expect him to teach Wei Bai? Yumachian couldn't help but look sideways at Wei Bai. She was obediently lying on his back, her eyelashes half closed, and the brightness in her eyes had dimmed quite a bit. The lack of blood made her look sick. Yumachian's irritable and uncomfortable feeling ran out again. It wasn't easy for him to raise a child. How could he let others ruin it like this? The Imperial Path sect didn't want her, but he wanted her. It was a rare physique that was hard to come by even in 100 years. This kind of tender feeling made Yumachian have a very good impression of Wei Bai from the start. Later on, step by step, he took her under his protection. In the depths of Yumachian's black and red eyes, there was an incomparably cold emotion surging. A strange fluctuation appeared in his numb and lifeless eyes. He floated into the air and drew in the air with his sword. Countless bright yellow talismans appeared. The talismans on his yellow talismans gave off a dazzling golden light. When Bai Bai saw those yellow talismans, his eyes narrowed. He almost couldn't believe it. Heavenly Dao talismans? They were the most advanced talismans in the Heavenly Dao sect. Not many of the new generation in the Heavenly Dao sect could draw them. But this malicious ghost who had barged into the evil ghost formation could actually draw so many talismans at once. Bai Bai screamed at the top of his lungs, "Guard the formation door. Don't let him escape." Some disciples immediately took out countless talismans and stuck them outside the evil ghost formation in an attempt to strengthen the formation. The evil ghost formation was stimulated, and the red blood threads turned into beams of terrifying red blood light. Under the formation, some unknown and strange blood chi appeared. https://www.sashu.com/full text. https://www.sashu.com download text. https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1720. The malicious spirits that had been sleeping to resist the formation were awakened by this wave of energy. Ghost heads popped out from under the formation and roared at Yumachian. Yumachian looked down coldly. His eyes were cold and emotionless, but they carried a sense of arrogance. It was as if he was looking at ants. Those malicious spirits actually cowered, and some of them retracted their heads. Yumachian raised the tip of his sword, and the yellow talismans formed a circle around the formation. Some of them collided with the outer formation door, shaking the entire ghost fiend formation. The talismans outside the formation began to spontaneously combust. Yumachian stepped on the red weapons, and he felt a stinging sensation from the soles of his feet. These things were used to corrode spirit bodies. They didn't have much of an effect on humans. Yumachian still didn't feel reassured, so he stuck a yellow talisman on her body. It had a protective effect. He felt her reach out and gently press her fingers against his cold neck, as if she was very worried. Yumachian couldn't help but smile. Then, he stepped on the flying yellow talismans and rushed out of the formation. As long as he sent Weiwei Bai out, this kind of small situation wouldn't cause him much harm. But when his yellow talisman shook the formation door, a crack appeared. A jade pendant rang out. He looked up, and his eyes turned cold. Yu Sanqian? But how could Yu Sanqian still be alive? How many years had it been? He was at least 140 years old. A person couldn't live that long. Yumachian's eyes turned completely red. The black color disappeared, and red lines appeared on his face. They were exquisite and frightening. He stabbed the peach with sword into the formation, scaring the malicious spirits away. Then, he took out a fountain pen, and quickly drew a black formation in the air. The formation was terrifyingly complex. All kinds of yin and yang forces of heaven and earth were gathered together, and in the end, they reached a terrifying balance. The red gas suddenly began to sway. The black formation slowly rotated. In the middle of the large red formation, a small but refined black formation was slowly suppressing the large formation. Bai Bai and the rest of the disciples who had not seen the world were dumbstruck. Even Bai Bai was at the level of half a bucket of water. He had never seen such a terrifying and profound array formation before. Even if the Ghost Fiend array was unable to unleash its full power, it was still one of the most famous and powerful arrays. He was actually suppressed by Yumachian just like that. Yumachian floated in the air and whispered to Weiwei Bai, "We can get out, don't worry." Weiwei Bai's voice was calm and gentle. "With you here, I'm not worried." He trusted her so wholeheartedly. Yumachian was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 55. Just as the black array moved to the position that Yumachian wanted, he suddenly drew a door with his hand. The door opened above the black magic array. This was something that had been forcefully created. Weiwei Bai looked up and saw that it was completely dark outside the door. Yumachian was very calm as he quickly flew towards the door. But as soon as his fingers touched the door opened. His red eyes filled with killing intent, and a terrifying power erupted from his body as he retreated backwards. An ancient bronze mirror fell from the sky and smashed through a corner of the black magic array, smashing into the center of the Ghost Fiend array. The Ghost Fiend array seemed to have received a large amount of power. The red gas that had been on the verge of death turned into a bloody mist. The mist began to condense into a blood-like substance. The blood began to surge under their feet. Yumachian looked at the ancient bronze mirror and coldly turned his head. He gritted his teeth and said, "Yumachian. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. / transmigration system. Male god, come here." The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Chapter 1721. You can search time travel system. Prince Charming, you can come to Sashu. Come on Baidu to find the. It was indeed his cousin. The sound of a jade pendant rang out, and a middle-aged man slowly walked out. He was wearing a black tang suit. The people of the Tian Dao sect, especially the Yu family, liked to wear tang suits on formal occasions. The family tradition was passed down from generation to generation. They were all used to it. Yu Sanqian's face looked weathered, and his eyes were sinister and cold. His eyes were somewhat similar to Yumachian's, but they were much uglier than Yumachian's. When Yu Sanqian saw Yumachian, his feet trembled. He couldn't suppress the shock in his voice. "Younger brother, you were actually able to escape from that place. I thought your soul had already been destroyed. After all, Yumachian's body was the weapon that suppressed ghosts. It didn't matter if Yumachian's soul disappeared or not. Yu Sanqian thought that after so many years, Yumachian had already been devoured by other ghosts. After all the ghosts in that formation hated him to the core. In the end, they hadn't been destroyed. What was even more frightening was that his soul looked like a powerful, malicious ghost at first glance. This younger cousin of his was always able to surprise him. Yumachian glanced at the door and knew that he wouldn't be able to break through for the time being. He didn't waste time talking nonsense, and he didn't have the time to be friendly with Yu Sanqian. Let us go, and I'll let bygones be bygones. Since when did he only come out to seek justice from Yu Sanqian? But now, he wanted to take care of Wei Bai. She had lost so much blood that he needed to take her to the hospital. Even though he saw that Yu Sanqian was still alive, his heart didn't waver. Yu Sanqian opened the box, revealing the peachwood sword inside. The bright red knot on the peachwood sword was identical to the one in Yumachian's own hand. He sneered. Younger brother, look at how promising you are. How could I let you go? 100 years ago, I defeated you to take charge of the natural law school. Today, I can still beat you to death. Wei Bai rested her chin on Yumachian's shoulder and asked the system, Is this the villain? The system said, That's a powerful villain. I think it'll be hard for the male lead to leave. No matter how awesome Yumachian was, he was just a ghost. Furthermore, she was an evil ghost who was reluctant to leave the mortal realm. This kind of ghost was rejected by the heavenly Tao and rejected by the gods. They didn't even have a chance to fight on their own turf. Against a half-baked Bai, he was still able to handle it with ease. However, it wasn't so easy to fool Yu Sanqian. The system sent Yu Sanqian's information to Wei Bai. When Wei Bai saw this, her expression changed. Yu Sanqian wasn't human either. Whether it was his character or his body, he was definitely not a human. To extend his lifespan, Yu Sanqian had refined half of his body into a corpse. Then, he absorbed the ghost energy of evil ghosts to nourish his body, so that half of his body could be maintained in a very youthful state. What kind of weird monster was this? Yu Sanqian held the peachwood sword and said mockingly, Back then, this peachwood sword was passed down to you by the sect leader, who told you to be the successor. Everything was yours. But now, your inherited peachwood sword is in my hands. Killing you is as easy as pie. Yumachian looked at the peachwood sword in his hand. For the first time, his red eyes showed signs of nervousness. No matter how real the peachwood sword in his hand was, it was still fake. He looked at the door he drew and suddenly whispered to Wei Bai, I'm opening the gate of ghosts. When you go in alone later, remember to throw money all the way. When you see a white light, immediately rush out. Remember, you must throw money. Below to record this reading. Chapter 1722. When Wei Bai heard his words, she couldn't help but pinch his shoulder hard with her fingers. Then she said sincerely, If we're going, we'll go together. Yumachian was touched, but he still reminded her, Don't forget what I said. Wei Bai said, I won't go alone. The worry in Yumachian's eyes was replaced by a smile. Why, are you that afraid of ghosts? Wei Bai wasn't lying this time. I'm scared. The eerie feeling of walking the ghost path alone was as if one had suddenly appeared in a haunted house in the wilderness. That kind of scary feeling. Even ghosts didn't need to appear to scare themselves to death. Yumachian thought that she was worried about him. His fierce murderous aura and violent impulses calmed down. He said, Don't be afraid, it'll be fine. After saying that, the peachwood sword in his hand suddenly disappeared, and a fountain pen appeared. Countless lines flowed out from the tip of the fountain pen. Yumachian had already stabbed a rooster to death with the peachwood sword. The rooster's blood soaked the sword. The sword immediately shone with a golden light. The ghost fiend array was nourished by the peachwood sword's power. The entire array began to spread out layer by layer. No one could escape. Those malicious ghosts screamed and struggled desperately. Layers of ghosts crawled out, densely packed together to tear Yumachian apart. These ghosts were controlled by the array. They were in pain and despair, twisting crazily. Countless ghost hands reached out from the ground. The red fog turned into a huge pool of blood. Countless ghosts writhed in the bloody water. It looked abnormally disgusting and scary. Yumachian didn't care about the ghosts pulling at him. He didn't want Weiwei Bai to be caught by the ghosts. Those ink lines weaved into a bridge. He immediately stepped on the bridge and ran forward. A golden peach wood sword suddenly appeared in the array. With a kind of destructive power, it stabbed towards Yumachian's back. When Weiwei Bai was thrown into the door by him, the peachwood sword had already stabbed into Yumachian's back. The power condensed from the fountain pen lines could not resist the peachwood sword at all. Yumachian's expression was incomparably calm. It was as if he had known this would happen. This peachwood sword belonged to him when he was alive. Of course, he knew how powerful this sword was. When he was still a human, he was still young and immature. Even though he had a pure young body, it was still difficult for him to control it. It had been soaked in the blood of countless generations of sect masters of the natural law school. Once the sword was drawn, the peachwood sword would not leave until the ghost was killed. Not a single ghost could survive under this peachwood sword. When he saw this sword, Yumachian knew that he was destined to die. If it was any other time, he might have been able to find a way to escape. But the person on his back was Weiwei Bai. He was trapped in the ghost fiend array again. If even one of them could escape, they would have profited. Yumachian chose to throw Weiwei Bai into the gate of ghosts. Was it deep love? It shouldn't have reached that point yet. But every time he saw Weiwei Bai, he felt happy. 100 years of lonely life, a dark and ugly hell. He had been floating for too long. He met a person as cute as the sun. She played with him and caught ghosts with him. She laughed with him. It was only a matter of time before his heart fell for her. They hadn't been together long enough. Yumachian looked at her in shock. The gate of ghosts slowly closed. The peachwood sword had already pierced through his body, and the tip of the sword was exposed in front of his chest. His face was extremely pale, and his spiritual body was on the verge of collapse. But he floated in front of the door firmly, staring at Weiwei Bai as she left. The gate of ghosts hadn't closed. He wouldn't leave here. When Weiwei Bai was thrown into the gate of ghosts, she had already called the system. Bai Tongzi. The system immediately replenished its life points and bought a life-saving item. Weiwei Bai said, "For Yumachian." To save his life. The system frowned, but it still threw the item to Yumachian without hesitation. The gate of ghosts closed completely. Weiwei Bai was thrown into the gate of ghosts. She still stared at the closed gate of ghosts and said coldly, "Is he okay?" It was a life-saving item worth 100,000 life points. It was discounted because of the flaw, not because of the effect. The system said he's fine. That life-saving item is very powerful. Weiwei Bai asked, "What is it?" The system said, "Reverse luck by 10 times. Weiwei Bai asked, "Reverse luck?" The system said, "It can completely reverse his current bad luck. He will live because of the reverse luck." What was more terrifying was that this item was usually used by the main character. Once it was used, the reversal of luck would be so good that it was terrifying. Even if Yumachian wanted to commit suicide, there were many reasons why he wouldn't die. Weiwei Bai said, "That's good." Then she stood up, her legs trembling as she threw money at the system. "Tongzi, what do you mean you're not afraid because you've seen a lot of ghosts? It's all a lie." The system said, "I'll play a song for you." Weiwei Bai said, "Play a song with positive energy." The system said, "Yes, only mothers are good in the world. Children with mothers are like treasures." Weiwei Bai said, "This song is scaring me even more." The system said, "Change the lyrics. Only Yumachian is good in the world. Children with Yumachian want treasures." With that change, Weiwei Bai felt that the effect was great. She was thinking about Yumachian throwing money at him the whole time. And she was not afraid anymore. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click save below to record this reading record. Chapter 1723. The Ghost Gate Closed. Yumachian stretched out his fingertip, and the fountain pen began to turn illusory. He touched the fountain pen with his fingertip, closed his eyes, and said softly, "Unlock." He was actually unwilling to unlock the seal of the fountain pen. Back then, to obtain the Providence item from the gathering place of vengeful spirits, the sect leader was killed. He was suppressed and suppressed. Later on he was suppressed, And while he was struggling, he attracted an item of providence. Only after he obtained the item did he realize that this was a huge trap. Those ghosts relied on this thing to survive. And the longer they lived, the more powerful they became. And the providence item, which was the fountain pen in his hand, absorbed the resentment of those ghosts to strengthen itself. This was a circular process. After he entered, to break this balance and weaken the vengeful spirits of the ancient battlefield, he sealed most of the power of the fountain pen. The providence item could transform into anything. He turned into a fountain pen for ease of carrying. After all, he had just entered university, but he couldn't go after a few days. The fountain pen in Yumachian's hand was not the original fountain pen. The original fountain pen was beside his body. He unlocked the seal of the fountain pen, and the consequences were bearable. Probably, Yumachian sighed as he watched the fountain pen change color, and the ink turn red. The red ink was even brighter than the blood of the ghost fiend array. His spirit body began to collapse. The golden light of the peachwood sword drilled into his empty heart, and his soul was burned by the golden light. He watched as his fingers began to spontaneously combust. Yumachian's eyes were a little tired, and the blood-colored ink began to flow through his body. The ink that unlocked the seal would affect his mind. Many baleful ghosts did not have any intelligence. They only existed because of their obsession. The ink protected him, but it would also begin to corrode his mind. In the end, he was no different from any of the other foolish evil ghosts. He didn't know if he could see Weiwei again. It was better not to. Yumachian thought that if he became a real ghost, it might scare her. She was so afraid of ghosts. Seeing him become a fool, she might not like him as much. Yumachian glanced at the vengeful spirits at his feet, and the countless blood bubbles. The resentment stung his body, and under the suppression of the ink, the rate at which his body spontaneously combusted started to slow down. Red ink began to drip from his body, drop by drop. Then line after line of ink appeared. In the end, more and more ink appeared, flowing like a small river. It flowed from his body to the ground, and merged with the blood. The vengeful spirits began to freeze as if they were bound by something. Yumachian's eyes were bloodshot as he looked at the vengeful spirits. He raised his hand and spread his fingers. Countless lines drawn in ink fell from his fingertips. The countless lines were close to the heads of the vengeful spirits. The vengeful spirits began to materialize. It was the body drawn in red ink. Yumachian drew bodies for hundreds of malicious spirits. With bodies, the vengeful spirits could leave the ghost fiend array, and the string on his hand could control the evil spirits of the corpses. Actually, he didn't like this method because it was too harmful to the harmony of the heavens. By controlling the vengeful spirits and placing oneself above the 100 ghosts, one's evil debt would increase. It would also be very taxing on the soul. The peachwood sword in front of Yumachian's chest crushed the red ink bit by bit and drilled into his chest. But he seemed to be unaware of it. He raised his hand and controlled the 100 ghosts to move forward. Yumachian looked at Yusantian outside the array. Yusantian's expression was incomparably cold. When he saw the vengeful spirits turn into corpses, his eyes trembled. Chapter 1724. He immediately took out the heavenly Dao talismans from the box. Countless heavenly Dao talismans flew into the formation. They stuck to the foreheads of the actual malicious ghosts. The bodies of the malicious ghosts began to burn. Yumachian was expressionless. It was as if the burning malicious ghosts were not worth mentioning to him. But every time a thread was broken, his soul would become a little more transparent, and the peachwood sword would advance a little more. The malicious ghosts continued to advance. Under Yumachian's control, they desperately crashed into the expanding formation. Yumachian slowly advanced. His pale and slender fingers were twisted because he was using too much force. It was very painful, but Yumachian was used to it. He had killed ghosts for 100 years. He had fought alone with a fountain pen for 100 years. He was very tired. Weiwei brought him out of that hell. It was like casting a ray of light into his dark world. Yumachian smiled. She was alone on the ghost path. He didn't know if she was afraid. The formation began to weaken. After all, the heavenly Dao talismans were limited. They couldn't kill all the actual ghosts. In the end, the The formation's periphery cracked a little. Yumachian closed his eyes and pursed his lips. His feet floated in the air. Then, he reached back and grabbed the peachwood sword. The scorching flames began to melt his fingers. He didn't care. Then, under Yu Sanqian's shocked gaze, he braved the danger of his soul dispersing, and forcibly pulled the peachwood sword out of his body. The peachwood sword shone with a dazzling light. But the black wound on his chest couldn't heal. Yumachian held the peachwood sword that could kill him, and stabbed it into the gap in the formation's periphery. The formation was shaken, and emitted a violent noise. It began to crack. Yumachian's fingers gripped the peachwood sword tightly. The peachwood sword struggled with all its might. It wanted to kill Yumachian. Under this struggle, more than half of his body became transparent. With a wave of his hand, Yu Sanqian produced over 100 heavenly Tao talismans, and an 8 trigrams trapping formation. But Yumachian held the peachwood sword, and walked forward step by step. When the heavenly Tao talisman entered his body, other than making him transparent, it couldn't stop him from moving. The siege array was a joke. This formation was something he had created himself 100 years ago. Yu Sanqian must have forgotten. Using his array to trap him? Yumachian sneered. Finally he walked up to Yu Sanqian. He reached out to grab Yu Sanqian, but his fingers passed through his neck instead. I forgot that I don't have a physical body now. That was why they couldn't come into contact with living people. Other than Wei Bai, he could not touch anyone else. Yumachian didn't breathe either, but he still sighed. After spending so much time with Wei Bai, he had also become stupid. Yumachian didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, and a wisp of ghostly qi appeared. The ghostly qi bound Yu Sanqian. This cousin of his had very poor aptitude. Back then, no one had taken him seriously. As for Yumachian, there was no need to mention him. There was no common language between a genius and a flunky with poor talent. He just felt that this cousin of his was pleasant to hear and comfortable to get along with. Their relationship was alright. He didn't expect Yu Sanqian to be so powerful. His ghost-catching skills weren't the most important thing. Winning people's hearts was the most important thing. Yu Sanqian was really good at winning people's hearts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to persuade everyone to suppress him in that place back then. No matter what, he was still the martial uncle of the sect leader, the successor of the sect's older generation. The ghostly qi in Yumachian's hand turned into a sharp blade, and began to cut Yu Sanqian's neck. Yu Sanqian's expression was extremely twisted. He roared, Yumachian, I admit that you are powerful, but your soul is destined to be scattered, and I will still be the sect leader of the Heavenly Tao sect. Chapter 1725. Yumachian looked at him indifferently. His blood-red eyes were exceptionally terrifying. He said, What did you use to change your body? He had never seen a person's body that was so strange. Half of his neck was broken, but there was no blood flowing out. What was even more terrifying was that Yu Sanqian could still speak when his windpipe was already visible. This kind of evil technique was definitely harmful. Yu Sanqian sneered. You might have forgotten, but before you died, I cut off a bunch of your hair. Yumachian fell silent. He was recalling what had happened back then. It was too chaotic. He couldn't remember clearly. However, it was true that his body and hair were very short. What could he do with his hair? Yu Sanqian said, You have a pure yang body. Your hair also contains a lot of pure yang energy. I used your hair to capture the souls of many malicious ghosts, then weave them into a net to bind their vitality. I sewed it into my own body. The result of this was that he could continuously use resentment to keep his body young. However, it was also very painful. Because there wasn't enough yang energy, it was very unbearable when the resentment killed each other. Yumachian. He thought about how his hair was on this guy's body. It didn't feel good. It was a little disgusting. Yumachian reached out to break his neck. He planned to pull out the hair from his body and burn it. Yu Sanqian's expression turned sinister. Do you think you can kill me? Dream on. I could kill you 100 years ago, and I can still kill you today. Yumachian didn't speak. He couldn't speak either. He was about to lose his grip on the peachwood sword. Once he let go or his wrist disappeared, the peachwood sword would completely kill him. Bit by bit, the ghostly energy formed a sharp blade, and cut Yumachian's neck. Just when there was only a layer of skin left on his neck, the resentment of the wronged spirits emerged from Yusanshian's neck. Black energy rose, making Yusanshian look even more terrifying. He sneered and suddenly pulled off the jade pendant at his waist. The jade pendant made a sound. Yumachian's hand trembled, and his skull started to hurt. His entire body was weak, and the peachwood sword in his hand loosened. The sword emitted a golden light, and ruthlessly stabbed into Yumachian's body. His body began to dissipate into specks of light. Yumachian's eyes were dim and lusterless, like glass beads that had lost their vitality. His hand disappeared. His body also began to disappear. Yusanshian laughed loudly. "You're nothing compared to the pure yang body. You're nothing more than an ant in my hands. I've found another pure yang body. As long as I kill her and absorb her flesh and blood into my body, I'll be able to live forever." This was the flesh and blood of a true pure yang body, not a handful of hair. With so much pure yang qi, he would definitely be able to completely suppress the resentment of the ghost. That way, he would not have to suffer any more pain. Yumachian widened his eyes, which were filled with killing intent. But this was the last trace of his anger. He thought of Wei Bai. This was his last wish. She was in danger, but there was nothing he could do. This wish was deeply rooted in his heart. In the air of nothingness, he completely disappeared. Some of the uncontrollable ghosts with physical bodies had already charged into the front yard. There were also some who entered the hall. The ghosts with physical bodies were extremely terrifying. They stumbled around like zombies. Their faces were ashen, their eyes protruded, and their fingernails were long and black. His cousin was still arguing with his third granduncle. "We should get rid of these futile things. What's the point of keeping so many useless rituals?" Third granduncle. "There are some useful ones. They can prevent ghosts from entering." Chapter 1726. The cousin rolled her eyes. "There's no ghost, you're just a remnant of the past. If there's really a ghost, I'll live stream myself swallowing the high heels." After saying that, she realized that she spoke too fast again. But when she thought that there was definitely no ghost, she sighed in relief. Suddenly there was a scream. The cousin was stunned. She looked up and saw a zombie ghost thing pouncing on her. She was slow to react. The ghost was already baring its teeth and pouncing on her. The cousin was scared stiff. Third great uncle suddenly made a move. He pulled out a copper coin sword from his waist and hit the ghost hard. The ghost's physical body turned into messy lines. A black fog rushed out of its body. The cousin saw it clearly. She finally screamed, "Ghost!" Third great uncle saw that it was a malicious ghost and pulled the cousin to run. They finally ran outside. Third great uncle immediately picked up his phone. "It's time for my live stream. Come. You can live stream yourself swallowing the high heels and earn me a gift." The cousin was speechless. Wei Bai had just exited the gate of ghosts. She heard the system say, "Favorability level is 60. Wei Bai, he escaped. System. His soul has been scattered." Wei Bai. The silence was so tacit. The atmosphere was awkward for a while. Wei Bai finally spoke. "What happened to the 100,000 life points? What happened to the Yumachian child being like a treasure? Have I turned into grass now?" Yumachian's soul had been scattered. What did it mean that his soul had been scattered? It was already bad enough that he didn't have a strategy. Even ghosts didn't have a chance. Was this forcing her to die? Finally, there was a sweet little Qianqian who had good morals, good at catching ghosts, and a strong boyfriend. In the end, his soul had been scattered. What did she do wrong? Did she not deserve to be treated as a sweet female lead? Wei Bai hugged her head and was about to kneel and cry. The system said, however, after that reversal of fortune, some of his soul was still preserved. It was a blessing in disguise as his soul returned to his body. In the past, when Yumachian was suppressed, his soul was unable to return to his body. After all, how could a dead ghost return to its dead body? Even if that body was still alive. The boundary between ghosts and humans, the boundary between yin and yang, it was unbreakable. Although Yumachian's soul was damaged this time, it still managed to enter his body. He would be able to recover his soul after a certain period of time. And because of the reversal of fortune, Yumachian's plane would always be smooth sailing. He could do whatever he wanted. Wei Wei Bai stopped the urge to hug her head. She reached out to touch her chin, and pondered for a while. You're saying that he is alive? The system replied, yes, it's alive. Hurry up and find your sweet cookie. Wei Wei Bai said, Tongzi, I've never felt that you were so reliable. The system replied, of course, I'm your big sweet biscuit. Wei Wei Bai. The expired kind? The system. Meanwhile, the place where Yumachian was being suppressed. The teaching building began to collapse. Countless ghosts rushed out of the building. However, the huge suppression force prevented them from leaving. Yumachian, who was lying in the depths of the ground, finally opened his eyes slowly. In his hand was a worn-out fountain pen tied with a red string. His eyes were extremely dark. In the middle of his black pupils was a red halo. However, in the depths of the halo, there was a deep and cold murderous aura. His mind was blank. His thin lips moved slightly. Wei Wei Bai. The name was very familiar, but his mind was occupied by the cold nothingness, so the name quickly disappeared. Ding, the male lead's favorability level is 0. Wei Wei Bai and the system were still laughing. Then they were speechless. What? To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1727. Bai Weiwei lay flat on the bed, her face sluggish. The system tried its best to comfort her. It's just 0. Think about those male leads with -50 favorability. You were full of fighting spirit back then. Weiwei Bai pulled the blanket and covered her face. I'm dead. Don't talk to me. If you don't return the 60 favorability, I can't be saved. The favorability in the past was so little. There was no expectation, no disappointment. Of course she was full of fighting spirit. But how could the favorability of 0 be the same this time? She was so happy that it reached 60. She took back the favorability in an instant. She wanted to hang herself with the blanket. She didn't want to live anymore. The system said, you can't run away even if you're dead. We still have to conquer it. Weiwei Bai got up quietly and started twisting the blanket. She twisted it into a rope and sang, my life is hard. I lost my mother when I was 3. My father died when I was 7. I met a ghost when I went out and came home alone. I finally met a sweet cookie, but it's all poison. The system covered its ears, stopped singing. Your father isn't dead yet. Bai Changyan was still alive and kicking. How is he dead? Weiwei Bai said, artistic processing is always worse. The system, is artistic processing the death of your whole family? Weiwei Bai finished twisting the rope and said, Tongzi, do you have a physical body that can come out? The system said, no, you can't touch me. The Yi Yuxuan in the real world could. Weiwei Bai didn't have that ability. Of course, this was too embarrassing, so it didn't say it. Weiwei Bai looked at the rope. What a pity. I was going to hang you up and see if you can be normal again. The system, ? Weiwei Bai said, it must be because you're broken. Otherwise, how could the favorability suddenly drop to 0? The system immediately explained, it's not me. The male lead soul is damaged. The damaged soul includes the memories of his time with you. You're a stranger now. How could he have favorability for you? Amnesia was such a cliché. It thought that the host was the only shameless one who knew how to use it. Who knew that Yumachian would be so unlucky as to become a victim of the amnesia army. Weiwei Bai said, I don't want to hear it. You must be the one who broke it. The host had gone mad. The sweet biscuits really couldn't be eaten. They were all poisonous. She was a good host, yet she could still act pretentiously when she saw a -50 favorability rating. Now, he had suffered a blow where 60 favorable impression points had evaporated. He was unable to recover from the setback. It was too tragic. The system tried its best to comfort him. At least the side mission is completed. Before Yumachian's soul dissipated, he had killed more than 100 ghosts, perhaps even 1,000. After completing the side mission, at least Weiwei Bai would not be electrocuted. Weiwei Bai, you don't even have a main storyline. You can scram for the side quests. She wanted to continue being a salted fish. The system couldn't help but pull open its drawer and take a look at the few things inside. Why don't I give her a gift to make her happy? Perhaps she would turn from a dead salted fish into a good salted fish that could turn over a new leaf. Just as the system was choosing a gift, Weiwei suddenly stood up. She reached out and rubbed her face. The lifeless look in her eyes suddenly turned bright. She said energetically, "Forget it, we have so much time. It's not too late to refresh again. Let's enter that place of suppression again and look for Yumachian." The host's emotions were more terrifying than a tsunami. The ups and downs of her emotions made people completely dumbfounded. The system stuffed the gift back into the drawer and said, "Okay, let's quickly go and refresh the favorability rating." Weiwei immediately tidied herself up very quickly. Then, she opened the hotel room door and ran out. The system was dumbfounded. Her actions were too fast. Then it looked at the ceiling in hindsight. It saw a hanged ghost hanging from the ceiling lamp. It stuck out its tongue and said, "My life is hard. I lost my mother when I was 3, and my father when I was 7. The system. The. Chapter 1728. So the host didn't pull herself together, but saw a ghost, so she went back to increase her favorability? After all, Yumachian's ability to catch ghosts was top-notch. Weiwei's yin-yang eyes were too useful. Some talented people could only see a few ghosts at most. But in the end, she could see ghosts wherever they were. And it was the kind with high definition. The scariest thing was that she could meet ghosts that looked like humans. Sometimes when she brushed past her, she could feel the cold temperature. Weiwei said, "A child with Yumachian is a treasure. I won't leave Yumachian even if I die." This world was too insecure. There was no such thing as a master ghost hunter, Yumachian. She didn't feel secure, and she was afraid of ghosts lying on her bed. The system had already flipped through the information on Yumachian's condition. The information was black, as if it had accidentally dropped it when it was eating sesame paste. The system wiped it with its sleeve. Just take a taxi. Weiwei could enter that forbidden area with her physique. That school building was from another world. Without a special connection, humans couldn't see it. Weiwei could see it, and she could enter. Weiwei nodded, and used the taxi app to call for a taxi. The car arrived, and it was a BMW. These days, people who drove BMWs would come to take orders. It seemed that it was hard to survive anywhere. Weiwei opened the car door, and was about to close the door when her face suddenly turned cold. She looked at the decorations in the car. Then she looked at the driver. The driver turned around, and it was a young man. He seemed a little nervous. "Get in," Weiwei said. "I need to change my address, the journey is a little long." The driver said, "It's okay, I can get there no matter how long it is." Weiwei said, "The fare is a little expensive. I suddenly realized that I don't have enough money. I'd better cancel the order first." The young driver immediately said, "It's okay. I can even take it for free. I don't lack money. It's just a hobby. I'm willing to help others." Weiwei nodded. Seeing that she was about to get into the car, the driver relaxed. However, she suddenly retreated and immediately turned around to rush into the crowd. The few cars following behind the BMW immediately chased after them. Weiwei went to the places where there were many people, but the roads were narrow. Soon, she disappeared into the crowd. The people in the cars opened their doors one after another, and chased after him with all their might. Weiwei gritted her teeth. Who is this bastard? This body of hers shouldn't have provoked any enemies. That BMW just now, and the ornament on the front of the car were real antiques, and would be worth at least a few million at an auction. Not to mention the small items inside. Even mineral water was expensive by air. For such a person to become a chauffeur, he either had a problem or a motive. The system said, "Yu Sanqian is here to capture you." Weiwei. How did I offend him? Doesn't he only have a grudge against Yumachian? She had never met Yu Sanqian before. The system said, "It's like this. You have a pure young body." Then, the system told her the reason why Yu Sanqian wanted to capture her. It was especially serious. He wanted to kill her, and take her flesh and bones to fuse with his body or something. After hearing that, Weiwei felt like she wouldn't be able to eat meat for a week. It was disgusting. Then, She thought about how Yumachian's hair was in Yusantian's arms. She felt even more aggrieved for Yu Tian. Wei Weibai called for another car and rushed to the place where Yumachian was suppressed last time. It didn't matter if it was a human or a ghost. The Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1729. If not for the name Yumachian, Wei Weibai would not have been the main focus. The driver was curious about where Wei Weibai was going. After all, it was a desolate place. However, it was not so desolate that no one was there. It was an old neighborhood. After getting out of the car, Wei Weibai took out fortune from her palm and gave it to the driver. As expected, the driver saw fortune as money. Wei Weibai had realized that as long as she took out fortune or lifespan from her account, normal people would see it as money. The driver drove the car away, but he didn't see anything wrong. There were still people on the streets, but there were also many ghosts. In fact, there were too many of them. Normal people could not see ghosts, but when the residents of the old neighborhood passed by ghosts, there was an obvious gray line between them. This meant that yin and yang were separated. Without a special reason, they would not bump into each other. However, if a human had too much negative energy and was weak in yang, they would cross over to the yin side, and ghosts would have a chance to catch up. Wei Weibai saw that at the end of the old neighborhood, where normal people could not see, was a gray area. The dilapidated teaching building had collapsed. All the collapsed stones were separated by the gray area, and no stones could roll out. At the edge of the gray area, a bunch of ghosts were lying there, quietly looking at the neighborhood. It was a very strange scene. Were these the evil spirits that suppressed the earth? Wei Weibai stopped in her tracks. She realized that she was going to be scared again. There were so many ghosts. How was she going to go in? The system said, "Don't be scared, it's just a few little ghosts. Take out your arrogance and go in." Wei Weibai said, "How about we change and try again?" The system said, "But those people are coming." Wei Weibai frowned and looked back. Indeed, she saw a few people in an alley not far away. They looked like they were looking for something. Ghosts and flesh were merged into a human's body. One was scary, and the other was disgusting. Should she choose scary or disgusting? As expected, it was unbearably disgusting. Wei Weibai immediately rushed forward. She knew Yumachian's character. Even if he had forgotten about her, seeing her physique, and the fact that she was a human who had accidentally intruded, he would definitely feel compassion for her like last time. Therefore, she decided to redo her strategy. All he did was stir-fry the biscuits. It was still a sweet cookie. Bai Weiwei's entire body plunged into the gray area, and she raised a handful of paper money. Anyway, all he had to do was remember to throw money at the dirty places. Sure enough, once the money was spread out, the ghosts were attracted. Wei Weibai took the opportunity to run in and disappear from the world of the living. Among the people sent by Yu Sanqian, one of them was holding a searching compass. Seeing the needle suddenly go haywire, the leader's expression changed. Then, he glanced at the end of the old street. It was a very ordinary street, and Wei Weibai's aura had completely disappeared. Just as he was about to take a step forward, the protective amulet hidden in front of his chest suddenly combusted. The leader's expression immediately turned ugly, and he almost vomited blood. He said to the people behind him, "Hurry up and retreat. This place is inauspicious." After Wei Weibai stepped onto the gray ground, the ghosts' gazes slowly moved from the paper money to Wei Weibai. They actually didn't pick up the money. Instead, they looked at Wei Weibai with strange gazes. These ghosts all had frighteningly pale faces, black holes in their eyes and sunken skin. So many ghosts looked over at the same time. Not only Wei Weibai, even the system couldn't handle it. Chapter 1730. It said, "It is a little scary." Wei Weibai said, "Give me a wheelchair, my legs are weak." Her childhood trauma was not something that could be covered. She did not watch horror movies, so there was a limit to her fear of the dark. Now after the baptism of the wraith plane, when the sky turned dark at night, her mind would be clear, and she would think of ghosts with vivid images. Wei Wei Bai indicated that her childhood trauma had officially been renamed as an adult trauma. It was worth celebrating. The system said, "You forgot that the supermarket was closed, so you couldn't buy anything. I saw the male lead. He's in classroom 404 of the teaching building." Half of the teaching building had collapsed. There was still half left. Classroom 404 was in the half that did not collapse. Wei Wei Bai thought of her savior, Yu Maqian, and tried to take a step forward. However, as soon as she moved, the ghosts were immediately frightened and took 3 steps back. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Then she tried to take 2 more steps. The ghosts finally showed a frightened expression and immediately took 4 steps back. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Was she that scary? Didn't they say that only her blood had the effect of scaring ghosts? Her wrist was almost healed, and Yu Maqian's Chinese talisman was very useful. That was why there was no smell of blood. Wei Wei Bai tried to walk forward quickly. With a crash, all the ghosts fell to the ground and started to tremble. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What are these ghosts? Why are they so afraid of me? Did I do something that scared them? Could it be that my pure young body has evolved, and as long as I stand, the ghosts will be afraid of me? Wei Wei Bai showed a smug smile. Haha, I didn't expect you to have such a day. Halfway through her smile, the ghosts raised their heads and looked at her eerily. Wei Wei Bai quietly suppressed her smile, then forced herself to be calm, and walked towards the teaching building. The ghosts did not chase after her. Wei Wei Bai sighed in relief. What's going on? Why are the ghosts so afraid of me? The system flipped through the information. Did you forget? When you first met the male lead, he left a nail mark on your hand. Wei Wei Bai asked, are they afraid of nail marks? The system strenuously read the information under the sesame paste. It seems that the male lead revived, and then, the ghosts are afraid of him. The fingerprints are filled with his scent, as if he left a mark. You also have his scent on you, so the ghosts think that you're the male lead, so they're afraid of you. Wei Wei Bai had already rushed up the stairs. As expected, the ghosts on the stairs all ran away. Although the stairs were still gloomy, Wei Wei Bai wasn't too afraid when she thought about how Yu Maqian's aura could scare away ghosts. Furthermore, he was going to meet Yu Maqian soon. Her heart began to settle down. By the way, what did Yu Maqian do to make all the ghosts so afraid of him? In the past, he was also afraid, but he was afraid of strength. He definitely wasn't so afraid that he would kneel on the ground. The system was still studying the information when it finally saw it clearly. It seems that Yu Maqian's incomplete soul was suppressed by the fountain pen. The one who woke up was the fountain pen's consciousness. And the fountain pen was a divine object that had suppressed these ghosts for many years. It had also been extracting the resentment of these malicious ghosts as food. To a certain extent, the fountain pen's consciousness was above all the ghosts. To the ghosts that were suppressed, it was like an emperor's existence. Wei Wei Bai had already pushed open the door to room 404. She saw Yu Maqian sitting at his desk, looking down at the fountain pen in his hand. The beautiful young man's misty eyes carried a conspicuous redness. He was quiet and thin, but his face was unusually calm. There was even a trace of a mysterious and ancient aura. He raised his head slightly and looked at Wei Wei Bai strangely. His eyelashes trembled. His black eyes and blood-red pupils had a stunning color. Wei Wei Bai blinked and asked the system, "Did you just say that Yu Maqian's consciousness was replaced by a fountain pen?" The system said, "Oh right, to suppress the male lead's mind, the pen might wipe out everything that the male lead cherishes." Wei Wei Bai suddenly had a bad feeling. Yu Maqian looked at her quietly for a while, and slowly revealed a beautiful smile. "Ah, you delivered yourself to my doorstep. I was just about to look for you." Sure enough, Wei Wei Bai only felt a cold breeze on her back. The system added, "That's right, you are the male lead's most precious past." Wei Wei Bai. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. / transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Comma. Chapter 1731. Yu Tiantian turned into Yu Pen. It seemed to be quite difficult to chew on. Wei Wei Bai saw Yu Maqian jump down from the table. His footsteps were solid and not light. He walked forward step by step, with a smile on his face, and said slowly, "It's good that you're here, Wei Wei Bai." Wei Wei Bai stepped back and looked at him cautiously. This fountain pen was actually trying to trick her into biting it. If she really bit it, she would definitely break her teeth. "Tongzi, is this guy Yu Maqian?" The system said yes and no. Such profound and philosophical words. Wei Wei Bai only had one thing to say after hearing it. "If you don't say it clearly, our friendship is over." The system said. For so many years, the male leads and fountain pen's consciousnesses have been fighting each other. Both of their consciousnesses have actually merged. You can't say that it's fountain pen's consciousness, because fountain pen is a dead object. Its consciousness comes from the male lead. Wei Wei Bai was confused. The system said. To put it simply, fountain pen's consciousness was formed by absorbing the evil side of the male lead. Yu Maqian was also human, and he died so miserably, being suppressed here as a suppressive object. After so many years of killing ghosts, he was infected with all kinds of ghostly energy and despair. How could he always maintain a good attitude? Fountain pen lived by absorbing evil thoughts. After being sealed by Yu Maqian, it was the closest thing to Yu Maqian, because it could no longer absorb the resentment of other ghosts. So fountain pen tried its best to absorb Yu Maqian's evil thoughts. As a result, fountain pen's consciousness and personality were actually Yu Maqian's evil side. Yu Maqian as a ghost was the amalgamation of all the good and kind personalities of the original body. After being resurrected, Yu Maqian's kind soul was damaged, so it maliciously controlled Yu Maqian's entire body. After listening to a bunch of explanations, Wei Wei Bai said, "Just say that he has schizophrenia." For the system to ramble on and on about such a thing was simply a waste of time. The system was silent for a moment. Well, to be exact, an angel and a demon exist in the same soul. And you're facing a demon now. Wei Wei Bai, even if you don't tell me, I know. It wasn't like Yu Maqian hadn't transformed into a demon before. Although he quickly regained his consciousness, he still looked exactly like the man in front of him. She suddenly felt her back go numb, because the classroom door was gone. The classroom had become a frightening boxy box. The windows and doors had become old walls. She leaned against the wall, but Yu Maqian had already leaned over. His body temperature was lower than normal people. However, it was not the eerily cold temperature of a ghost. Instead, it was the feeling of being able to truly feel the temperature of a human. Yu Maqian's smile was very gentle. It was similar to his kind smile. But for some reason, when this demon Yu Maqian laughed, his eyes were especially cold. It made people shudder. He gently raised his hand and suddenly placed it on her cheek. Her delicate cheeks were flushed, full of the vitality of a human. Wei Wei Bai's breathing was heavy, but the vigilance in her eyes did not change. If this person was still Yu Maqian, it didn't matter if he was an angel or a demon. Then their personalities should still be the same. As long as they had the same characteristics, then it should be possible to conquer them. What did the good and evil Yu Maqian have in common? Wei Wei Bai's fingers cursed and clenched. The supermarket was closed. The system was unreliable. The target's favorability was 0-0? Wei Wei Bai stared straight into Yu Maqian's eyes. If he was really that evil towards her, how could his score be 0? The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 1732. She was especially sensitive to favorability. 0 favorability meant that there was neither bad intentions nor good intentions. But most of the time, 0 meant that there was both disgust and love, so the favorability would cancel each other out. Although Yu Maqian's good intentions were damaged, his feelings were definitely still there. And this Yu Pen's feelings for her were definitely negative favorability. That was why the favorability would cancel each other out and become 0. Just as Wei Wei Bai was trying her best to find a strategy, Yu Maqian said softly, "Were you okay after that? I was really afraid that you would get hurt when you left me." This attitude, this sweet. He was much better at flirting than Yu Tian Tian. But then again, Yu Pen was full of resentment and malice. Generally speaking, bad guys were shameless when chasing after girls. Yu Maqian was so inflexible and shy. Other than silently increasing his affection for her and protecting her, he probably wouldn't be able to say more than a few words of love. Wei Weibai didn't know why Yu Pen's attitude was so strange. He definitely didn't have good intentions. But who didn't know how to act? Wei Weibai blinked. Her eyes were filled with tears, and the corners of her eyes turned red. The appearance of a young girl in the dark classroom was like the only bright color, bringing with it a piercing warmth. But it was also very pitiful. She said softly, "Big brother you." There was a slight tremble in her voice that made people's ears numb. Then, she reached out her hand and hugged his waist firmly and accurately. This was the real feeling of touching a human body. After sleeping for 100 years, she could still feel the lines of his muscles. Shouldn't he be paralyzed from sleeping, with muscles atrophied and bones loose? It wasn't normal for him to be able to jump around. She buried her head in his chest and pretended that she was hugging Yu Tiantian. After all, with Yu Pen's vision, she definitely didn't know that Yu Tiantian's mind had been switched. Yu Pen wanted to act, so she accompanied him and pretended to eat cookies. Her voice became sad. At this time, you still asked if I was okay. You were injured and wanted to save me. I was so worried that something would happen to you. It's great that you're okay. Yu Maqian lowered his head and looked at her, his strange eyes cold and indifferent. He reached out and touched her short hair. I'm so strong, no one can hurt me. She was like a little chick looking for a nest, pitifully nested in his chest. Yu Mo Qian's eyes were cold. He was silently searching Yu Mo Qianshan's soul. But he still couldn't find it. When that part of kindness's soul entered his body. At the same time, he rushed out of the fountain pen and entered his body. Yu Maqian's damaged soul naturally couldn't defeat him. But before he could destroy him, this part of his soul had hidden away. Yu Maqian was much more familiar with this body than he was. He searched for Yu Maqian's soul for a long time, but he couldn't find it. If this continued, when Yu Maqian's damaged soul slowly recovered, he would be completely wiped out by Yu Maqian. Yu Maqian thought coldly. He only had the thought of killing Wei Weibai. Only then did the kind-hearted part of Yu Maqian's soul react a little. But when he chased after it, he couldn't find it. Wei Weibai was definitely a very important existence. When he was fighting with Yu Maqian's soul, he swallowed a part of Yu Maqian's soul. In the end, those soul fragments were all related to Wei Weibai. In those souls the whole world was dark. But once Wei Weibai appeared, she was the only light in the soul's memory. Yu Maqian wasn't used to this kind of memory. He was an amalgamation of evil thoughts. He instinctively rejected anything bright and beautiful. Chapter 1733. Yu Maqian reached out and slowly touched Wei Weibai's hair, deep in thought. Suddenly, there was a dull pain in his heart, and his eyes flashed with joy. Found it, found it. He immediately bent his fingers, wanting to strangle Wei Weibai's neck. Kill her. That part of Yu Maqian's soul would definitely come out. But once this evil thought came out, the soul wave disappeared. Yu Pen? Wei Weibai buried her head in his chest, her eyes cold. She chatted with the system. What a murderous aura. I think I can't keep my skull. If Yu Pen wanted to kill her, it would be a piece of cake. The system patted its little chest. Don't worry. I'll give you a life guarantee, unless your head is torn in half. Otherwise, even if your intestines are all over the floor, take a bowl and cover your intestines. I guarantee that you'll be able to live. Wei Weibai. Your description is still so nauseating. Yu Maqian frowned. Why did the soul wave disappear? He clearly wanted to kill Wei Weibai. Because he was confused, his hands became gentle again, touching Wei Weibai's hair. His fingers accidentally brushing the tip of Wei Weibai's ear. Wei Weibai trembled. The tip of her ear started to turn red, the color of cherry blossoms. Especially delicate and cute. Yu Maqian lowered his eyes and looked at it. It looked delicious. Once this thought came out, the soul wave appeared again. Yu Maqian. But it was just a flash, he couldn't catch it. He wanted to kill Wei Weibai. But the soul didn't seem to have any reaction. Maybe it was because his murderous aura wasn't strong enough. After all, He couldn't feel any evil from Wei Bai. She wasn't an evil spirit that could be used. So he just wanted to kill her. But why did the part of Yu Maqian's soul react the moment he softened his attitude? Yu Pen had absorbed thousands of years of evil thoughts, including lust. He suddenly reacted. Jealousy was a man's angriest and most emotional moment. Yu Maqian sneered. He suddenly grabbed Wei Bai's shoulders and pressed her against the wall. Then he lowered his head and kissed her. The lust of evil thoughts. The gentleness of evil thoughts. They were all dark thoughts of seizing, imprisoning and torturing. His kiss had a kind of destructive power, entangling endlessly, firmly holding down the prey and not letting go. Wei Bai was dumbfounded. She was still discussing with the system how to escape, when Yu Pen was about to kill someone, and how to use the minimum life guarantee to get through. Why is this happening all of a sudden? She felt a pain on her lips, as Yu Maqian left her lips. His eyes were red as he gritted his teeth and said, "Coward, get the hell out of here. Your woman is in my hands." Wei Bai was speechless. This was the line of a supervillain. When Yu Maqian kissed Wei Bai, the soul in his body was very excited. Just a little bit more, and he would be able to track him down. But at the last moment, that soul actually held back. Yu Maqian spent so much effort to find that soul, because he wanted to chase out all the good thoughts left in this body. Then he would destroy them outside the body. It wasn't easy for him to get a body. He still wanted to use this body to be a human. Wei Bai was the key tool to force Yu Maqian's soul out. The killing intent wasn't enough to make Yu Maqian come out. But what a man couldn't stand the most was that his woman was taken by someone else. Yu Pen had absorbed Yu Maqian's evil thoughts for so many years. As a result, Yu Maqian's soul was pure and gentle like a little angel. Chapter 1734. However, Yu Pen was very clear about Yu Maqian's evil intentions. Stubbornness, perseverance, and the ability to work hard to achieve his goals. Although he knew how to save people, he did not think of himself as a saint. He even harbored evil intentions towards Wei Bai. At first, he wanted to keep her as an object to suppress. Later on, his evil intentions towards her were a desire to monopolize her and a man's desire. The desire to monopolize her, and most men's desires were absorbed by him. The desire to protect her remained in Yu Maqian's soul. Yu Maqian smiled coldly and said to the soul in his body, "Don't think that I don't know what you're thinking. You're about to die, so you want to borrow my hand to kill her so that she can be with you? Dream on." The combination of evil intentions had a very malicious way of thinking. Yu Maqian's malicious mind did not have any kind thoughts. He was bursting with evil intentions, so he did not think that if he really killed Wei Bai, there was a possibility that the soul would appear. He felt that it was best to destroy what he could not have. He thought that the soul had the same thoughts. That was why he gave up on killing Wei Bai, and tried to think of other ways to force the soul out. Yu Maqian stroked Wei Bai's head with a deep expression, completely unaware that his actions were especially gentle. Wei Bai had a strange illusion when he stroked her head. It was as if the two of them could stand there and stroke each other's heads forever. Wei Bai could not help but share her cute thoughts with the system. The system was silent for a while before saying, "Won't you go bald?" Wei Bai. The system, have you thought of a strategy? Wei Bai, let's try. Yu Maqian's state was very similar to when he was contaminated by the spirit energy. So Wei Bai quietly observed Yu Maqian. She found that his eyes were dark, and there was a gentle yet terrifying smile on his face. This was scarier than a ghost. Wei Bai slowly reached out and pressed down on Yu Maqian's hand that was touching her head. Then she looked up curiously. "Big brother Yu, how did you escape from that formation earlier?" Yu Maqian's thin lips couldn't help but curl up into a sneer. "That formation was very simple and weak. I destroyed it with a wave of my hand. It was about that useless coward Yu Maqian. He had been beaten to the point where his soul was scattered, and he had to flee like a stray dog. If he had been there, all those people would have died." Yu Maqian's eyes were filled with hostility. On the other hand, Wei Bai had a look of worship on her face. She held his hand and smiled sweetly like a spoiled child. "Big brother, you're so awesome. Can you teach me how to catch ghosts? You kept saying that you would teach me, but you didn't." I thought you didn't know how to do it at all. Yumachian's malicious nature included arrogance and his love for compliments. When he heard Wei Wei Bai say this, the smile on his face had already become twisted into a sinister grin. He didn't know how to do it. When he made those malicious ghosts kneel down, she was still crying somewhere on the bridge of helplessness. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes in embarrassment. You also said that you would teach me the most powerful formation. I thought you were bragging. The malicious intent in Yumachian's eyes was about to crawl out. I was bragging. The one who was bragging was clearly that annoying part of the soul. Yumachian's eyes suddenly moved. The smile on his face became gentle again. I'll teach you. That part of the soul wouldn't teach her. But he could. To make that part of the soul jealous, he had to show off his love with Wei Wei Bai. Moreover, he had to use a crushing method to let that cowardly soul know that he could take everything away from it. Yumachian patted her head. Let's go. Chapter 1735. After he finished speaking, he turned around and raised his hand. A door appeared in a strange way. From lines to solid objects, the process was like drawing. This U-Pen was really awesome. Yumachian was just about to walk out when a slender white finger gently hooked around his little finger. Wei Wei Bai asked weakly from behind. Brother, just now, why did you kiss me? Yumachian was expressionless, but his voice was as hoarse and deep as a poisonous snake's seductive voice. Because I like you. That coward really did like her a lot. He liked her so much that he only had the desire to protect her left. But he also gave all his evil thoughts to her. His fingers were a little cold, but her body was especially warm. When their fingers intertwined, there was a sense of reassurance. Then he heard her say, I also like you. That one sentence was said shyly. Yumachian maintained his gentle facade, but there was a flash of excitement in his eyes. Just now the fluctuation of the soul appeared again. Only jealousy could make that part of the soul appear. Yumachian turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai lowering her head. Her thick eyelashes were trembling, and the tips of her ears were red, as if she was too shy to look up. No matter how malicious a person was, seeing such a defenseless and fragile thing, that couldn't even withstand a single blow. Actually, they would feel a little gentleness. Yumachian moved. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 0. 1. Wei Wei Bai. The system silently ate a piece of potato chip. This stinginess was comparable to the host. Yumachian smiled at her. Let's go down and set up the formation. Wei Wei Bai nodded obediently. Then, when Yumachian turned around, she gently looked up, her eyes calm and cold. Then she softly said to the system, Tongzi, I want to destroy U-Pen. Only when U-Pen was destroyed could Tian come back. That's why we need to suppress the malice. The system asked how. The supermarket was closed. He couldn't exchange for anything useful. Wei Wei Bai said, My blood. Yumachian's malicious side was unable to increase his favorability. He couldn't do that either. Therefore, she had no choice but to awaken Yumachian's angelic side and bring her sweet biscuit back. The system frowned. You're not strong enough. Don't take the risk. Wei Wei Bai. Don't worry, I still have Yumachian's yellow talismans. They are very effective in healing. The yellow talisman was still in her pocket. After the wound on her wrist healed, she took it off and folded it properly. After all, the risk in this plane was high, and blood might be shed. He had to prepare some band-aids. Yumachian led her out of the half-collapsed school building. The color and temperature here were completely different from the outside world. Those malicious ghosts had already been scared away. Yumachian was very calm. He reached out and patted her head. Look carefully. I'll teach you a very good array to catch ghosts. U-Pen was quite knowledgeable when it came to coaxing girls. After all, with so many evil spirits, there were all kinds of tricks to deceive and fool people. Coaxing a little girl who hadn't seen the world was too easy for him. Yumachian raised his hand. Hundreds of yellow talismans turned from lines to solid objects, and very naturally appeared in the air. The yellow talismans fell to the ground with a whoosh, forming an extremely complicated array. The 100 Ghosts Array. No malicious ghosts can come out after entering. As he spoke, he searched for the soul in his body. There was no reaction. Wasn't it loving enough? Yumaqian smiled pretentiously. He reached out and pressed Wei Wei Bai's shoulder, then pulled her into his arms. Chapter 1736. Look at the size. This kind of small array can only capture about 100 ghosts. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her red face was full of worship. So powerful. Yumaqian snorted. How is that powerful? The array is big enough to destroy tens of thousands of ghosts. He was better than that trash in every way. After being suppressed for so many years, he felt like dying. It was not easy to suppress that trash. If he did not destroy him, he would not be able to vent his anger. Yumaqian raised his hand. A fountain pen appeared in his hand. Ink splashed out from the fountain pen. The densely packed yellow talismans turned solid in an instant. Those yellow talismans fell to the ground and expanded the array. Wei Wei Bai tried to step out, and found that nothing happened. Although Yumaqian was smiling, there was no smile in his eyes. There was even a malicious look in his eyes. It's okay. There's no problem with people going in. Wei Wei Bai said casually. Then Big Brother can't step in. I don't want to hurt you. Yumaqian frowned. He was also human. Wei Wei Bai did not know. He suddenly grabbed Wei Wei Bai's collar and dragged her to the center of the array. You should learn how to be ignorant and stupid. She could not even tell if he was human or not. This kind of trash. No wonder that Ghost Yumaqian had bad intentions towards her every day. It was all because of his training. He would hang her up and spank her. After all, with such a good aptitude, even self-study would not be so bad. There was also the childish idea of locking her in a cage and throwing a pair of ghosts in there to scare her, so that she would not be afraid of ghosts. This was not his idea. It was Yumaqian's bad intentions that he absorbed. Wei Wei Bai was dragged to the center of the array. He held her head roughly. Look at the lines of the yellow talismans and the decorations. If you don't remember, I'll hang you up and spank you next time. Wei Wei Bai. Motherfucker, can't you act more realistically when pretending to be Yumaqian? Her little Tian would not be so fierce to her. Sooner or later, this trash pen with cancer of the straight man would break him in two and flush his ink in the toilet. She rubbed her eyes and said pitifully, You're so fierce, brother. The system was drinking water and almost choked to death. Hearing the host's coquettish tone, it couldn't help but tremble. Although he was trying to coax her, couldn't he be more normal? That voice was so sweet that it could cause diabetes. However, Yumaqian really fell for this trick. The way she looked at him pitifully with red eyes simply satisfied Yu Pen's malicious interest. That was why her favorability towards him increased. The system looked at the favorability. It fell into deep contemplation. Was it too old? Did it not understand the young people's market? With the host's disgusting appearance, any normal person would want to pour cement into her and throw her into the sea. Yumaqian, why did he like this? Of course, Yumaqian didn't like this. It was just that his mind was filled with thoughts of capturing souls. The closer Wei Wei Bai was to him, the more it would arouse the reaction of his soul. In Yumaqian's eyes, when she acted coquettishly, it meant that she was being affectionate. If she was more affectionate, that coward soul wouldn't be able to hold it in. He reached out and stroked her hair. He lowered his head and said gently, It's my fault. I won't be fierce to you in the future. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but smile. You said before that you would protect me for life. Yumaqian's expression didn't change. His eyes were deep and emotionless. In the future, I will protect you for life too. Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his finger. She said softly, Really? Chapter 1737. Yumaqian felt that the strength in her fingers had increased. But he still had to go through with the act, so he nodded. Yes. Wei Wei Bai smiled brightly. Then why haven't you woken up yet? Yumaqian's eyes were bloodshot. His fingers were tightly gripped by her, and her palm was covered in blood. Wei Wei Bai hid a blade in her fingers and cut off the blood vessels on her wrist, causing blood to gush out continuously. The blood soaked Yumaqian's fingers, making them feel sticky and hot. But Yumaqian was not affected at all. The gentle smile on his lips turned into a ferocious ruthlessness. He said in a hair-raising voice, Oh, you found it. Unfortunately, I'm a human now. Your blood can't hurt me. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale from the excessive blood loss. She curled her lips, and her eyes were filled with a clear smile. She ignored Yu Pen's words and said with a cold smile, "Yu Maqian, you said you would protect me for life and be responsible for me. Now that I'm about to die, you better come out and be responsible for me." Suppress the pen's evil intentions. Only the kind Yu Maqian could do it. Yu Maqian was now in a deep sleep, and would only wake up with a strong impact. She needed him to get up and fight for the body with Yu Pen. She didn't want him to be a coward, curled up in an unknown corner like a stray dog, not daring to come out. Yu Maqian said he would protect her. His pedantic personality did not allow him to break his promise. System. Life subsistence guarantee activated. Host, you're taking too much of a risk. Wei Wei Bai. I believe you. System. Wei Wei Bai. I believe in the luck item you bought for me. I believe in the value of 100,000. That 100 life points plus the luck of the supermarket. The effect will always be there. If this was a male novel, then he would be the male lead who caught the cheat item. As long as it erupted, there was no reason for it to be suppressed. So she had to gamble with herself. She was betting that she was part of Yu Maqian's obsession. To a person who had experienced 100 years of loneliness, even if it wasn't love, it was still very important. Yu Maqian tilted her head. Her eyes were filled with mist, carrying a trace of the fragile beauty of cherry blossoms. But in the next second, he flung his hand and pushed Wei Wei Bai to the ground. Wei Wei Bai was unable to resist such a terrifying force, and fell heavily onto the yellow talisman. When the blood entered the yellow talisman, it emitted a bright light. However, Wei Wei Bai remained indifferent. She stretched out her bloody hand and gently touched her face. Is this how you watch others bully me? Yu Maqian's lips slowly curved into a cold smile. That's right. Tell him to come out. His goal was surprisingly the same as Wei Wei Bai's. To awaken that part of Yu Maqian's soul. She wanted to save him, but she didn't know that once that part of his soul appeared, he would be able to extinguish it. So Yu Maqian bent down and tightly pinched the wound on her wrist. Tell him to come out. Wei Wei Bai's face was stained with blood. Her eyes were incomparably cold. She was even more beautiful than the most charming of ghosts. She gently curved her lips and revealed a breathtaking smile. This smile wasn't pure at all. It wasn't cute at all. It was charming. Yu Maqian's eyes narrowed. Compared to the crying little cutie, his evil thoughts were closer to her fierce and cold appearance. This kind of beauty made his evil heart like it very much. Wei Wei Bai's nails suddenly dug into the back of his hand. She could hurt a human's body. Her nails dug into his flesh, pinching out a white wound. Soon bright red blood could be seen. Yu Maqian began to tremble. His eyes were filled with excitement. More ruthless, more crazy. Her malicious look made him feel more and more delicious. The system held a cup of water, and saw that the favorability had increased to 15, as if it had taken hormones. Yu Maqian was actually a masochist? Yu Maqian obviously wasn't a masochist. What he liked was malicious intent. Wei Wei Bai's malicious intent made him feel good all over. He had always relied on malicious intent to survive. The purer the malicious intent, the more he liked it. And Wei Wei Bai's malicious intent was even cleaner than Yu Maqian's. It was the first time he felt that a person's malicious intent could be so beautiful. Yu Maqian was a little excited. He held her blood-stained face. More violence let him enjoy more malicious intent. Wei Wei Bai released her nails and gently leaned into Yu Maqian's embrace. She seductively breathed into his neck. Yu Maqian's heart was hit hard. It was a spiritual fluctuation. There had never been such an intense spiritual fluctuation before. He was about to pinch Wei Wei Bai's fingers when he stopped. Her blood-stained fingers had already wrapped around his fingers. Then his fingers were pressed in front of her chest. Yu Maqian lowered his head in hindsight, only to see that her clothes had fallen off. She was as white as jade and stained with blood. Her eyes were abnormally bright. Her voice lowered. Yu Maqian, if you don't come out, I'll make you a cuckold. Yu Maqian was stunned. His pupils suddenly constricted. An intense pain swept through his chest. Slash. Chapter 1738. The system suddenly remembered the past. Oh, it wasn't that hard to understand. After all, psychopaths like pretentious people. Madmen always sympathized with each other. The system silently chewed on the spicy chicken feet. The host said that the favorability wouldn't be reminded, so it wouldn't. Once it was reminded, the host would definitely try his best to win over the evil you. Enchanting would be finished. It's still like Enchanting. At least a rare normal person couldn't be ruined by these two psychopaths. Enchanting was seduced by Wei Bai and became even more absent-minded. Not only did his chest hurt, but his head also hurt. Something was stirring up his vision. For the first time, he felt that the human body wasn't that good. Because the pain was too unbearable. Yupen had never been a human before. So he wasn't used to the human body. Even if his mind was strong, he still trembled because of the changes in his body. But he smiled. It was coming out. That part of his soul was going to be seduced out by Wei Bai. No matter how painful it was, his current strength was much stronger than the good part of his soul. The pain in his chest was too obvious. It felt like something was going to come out. It was the consciousness of that part of his soul. Enchanting's expression became gloomy and twisted. He raised his hand, and a fountain pen appeared. He was about to draw a cage to bind that part of his soul. But in the next moment, Wei Bai's hand grabbed his finger that was holding the fountain pen. She sighed. Her breath carried her unique light fragrance, making people feel very sentimental. But the words she said were as cold as a sword. I was waiting for you to show a flaw. After saying that, he felt a chill in his chest. Wei Bai's hand was full of blood. She grabbed his fountain pen and stabbed it into his chest. Enchanting didn't guard against Wei Bai from beginning to end. Wei Bai was so weak and stupid. More importantly, this was Enchanting's body. She definitely couldn't bear to hurt it. So she couldn't be a threat to him. But it was this girl, who didn't seem to be a threat at all, who actually took advantage of the time he was distracted and ruthlessly pushed his hand into his chest. The tip of the pen was very short, and it only pierced his skin. It didn't cause much pain. However, Enchanting was enraged. He tried to strangle Wei Bai from behind. But Bai Wei looked at him expressionlessly. She stabbed the pen a few more times, and her blood flowed into his wound, mixing with the ink of the pen. A bone-chilling power rushed into his body. After the coldness, there was an explosion of magma-like temperature. Wei Bai had been waiting for him to be distracted. She had been waiting for him to take out the pen for a long time. Otherwise, did he think that she liked to be possessed? The malicious side of Enchanting was that he thought too highly of his human body. He didn't even think about how long it had been since his body had been tainted with ghostly energy. It would be more accurate to say that he was a corpse with half a foot in the netherworld. Did he think that because he wasn't a ghost, he wasn't afraid of pure yang energy? Pure yang energy didn't just restrain ghosts. It was everything that was Een. The fountain pen was Een. Enchanting's body, which had been hidden for 100 years, was even more Een. She had used a suicide method to bleed so much, and it wasn't for making duck blood curd. Instead, she had to restrain the power of the fountain pen and think of a way to send yang energy into Enchanting's body. Enchanting's kind ghost had been with her for a long time. He was used to the feeling of yang energy, so even ghosts could restrain this kind of discomfort. But Yupen wasn't used to it. Chapter 1739. This was enough to make him feel pain for a few seconds. These few seconds were the key for Enchanting to take control of the body. Wei Bai reached out and pressed down on the fountain pen that was being suppressed by the blood, letting the tip of the fountain pen pierce into Enchanting's chest. Her white face was dyed with blood, making her look very sad. Enchanting, if you don't come out, I'll really die in front of you. She gritted her teeth as she shouted. The tears in her eyes fell down and mixed with the blood on her face. You said you would protect me. Is this how you protect me? Her voice was choked with grief, making people's hearts ache. You're a liar, she cried as she tightly stabbed into his chest. Enchanting gave a groan as he felt an unspeakable pain. He suddenly endured it and said, You. Don't cry. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Wei Bai and the system were shocked. Enchanting? Enchanting's eyes were in a daze, and his expression was very complicated. It was like several expressions fused together. You actually did this kind of thing. If I don't marry you, what will you do in the future? While he said this, he angrily took off his clothes and put them on her. When his fingers touched her bare skin, it was even better than the pain of his chaotic body. She actually did something like wearing a green hat to provoke him. Yumachian's mind was working very hard, but his memories were also in pieces. He remembered when they met. Then he went back to when he almost lost his soul, and threw her into the gate of ghosts. But the desire to protect her in his heart never changed. Even if his memories were in pieces, he also knew that this idiot in front of him was someone he needed to protect. Wei Bai stared at him in a daze as the tears in her eyes kept falling. A face mixed with blood, like a tabby cat. It was very pitiful to look at. Yumachian's eyes trembled violently. He had difficulty breathing as he said, "Don't move the pen away. Keep poking me. I need your strength." Wei Bai's blood contained a large amount of yin energy. He could adapt to this power. He was not used to the malicious side. It was already very difficult for him to wake up. He was awakened by Wei Bai. She took off her clothes everywhere. Even if he was lying in the coffin, he would wake up from anger. Yumachian pointed at his chest with difficulty. It was obvious that he was in a lot of pain. Every movement of his was close to the limit. Wei Bai didn't dare to move. She held the pen tightly in her hands, but it was obvious that she was also very uncomfortable. The corners of her eyes were red. She said in a trembling voice, "If you don't marry me, I'll be a widow." Yumachian, why does that sound so weird? If he didn't marry her, how could she be a widow? Wei Bai's voice seemed to tremble in her throat. It was weak, but it also carried a hint of ruthlessness. "If you don't marry me, I'll kill you and marry your corpse. If you don't marry me, I'll be a widow with your corpse." Yumachian, what a scary sentence, but it sounds very romantic. His finger touched the wound on his chest. There was still ink on the wound that was suppressed by blood. If Wei Bai hadn't suppressed the pen for a moment, he reckoned that he would have been completely strangled by the evil side just now. He drew in the air with his finger that was stained with ink and blood. A peachwood sword appeared. The red tassels were close to black. Yumachian's expression suddenly twisted, and his voice was incomparably cold. "Do you think you can fight me? Dream on with your broken soul." The button. Chapter 1740. Wei Bai saw that Yu Pen was about to appear again. She stabbed the fountain pen in her hand into his chest again. She didn't seem to love Yumachian at all. Was there anyone who treated the person they liked like this? So ruthless? Wei Bai wasn't only ruthless to Yumachian, but she was even more ruthless to herself. The wound on her wrist wasn't big enough, and the blood would coagulate after a while. She lowered her head and bit down on her wound again, glaring at Yumachian with a wolf-like gaze. Yumachian's eyes trembled violently. Too malicious. Too cute. Yumachian couldn't stand such a malicious gaze, and such a ruthless and crazy beauty. He couldn't resist at all. System. Yu Pen's favorability rating increased again. 30 became 40. It was an increase even more terrifying than Yu Tiantian's. Yu Tiantian's favorability rating only increased to 70 after a long time. Yu Pen was simply a pervert who fell in love at first sight. Of course, it's still like Yu Tiantian. Blood gushed out from the wound again, dyeing the fountain pen completely red. The power of the fountain pen ink was forced into Yumachian's body by the blood. There was no way to escape. Yumachian's malicious soul was attacked by the cold and sharp, and it even scattered again. And the kind soul instantly took the initiative of the body. He stabbed the peachwood sword in his hand into the center of the 100 Ghosts formation. This array that Bai Wei coaxed to complete. It was just right to use. Yumachian even felt that Wei Bai deliberately made this formation, because there was only one winner in the end when the body fought for power. And the defeated soul would be forced to escape. Once it escaped outside the body, it would become a malicious ghost. This array formation was used to restrain malicious ghosts. And Wei Bai believed that he could win. In the end, the ghost that was forced to escape was Fountain Pen's malicious consciousness. Yumachian used the power of the destruction of all his soul fragments to pick up hundreds of talisman papers, and use his blood to draw complex runes. Then he fiercely tapped his forehead with his fingertip. Even if he had to destroy his own body, he absolutely could not allow the pen's consciousness to take over this body. If she was malicious, she would kill Weiwei. Yumaqian's fingers were just about to touch his forehead. A crazy roar rang out from the depths of his mind. Idiot, you actually want to die together with me? Yumaqian sneered. Dying together is better than you coming out to do evil. Haha. I am the amalgamation of your evil thoughts. What righteousness? You don't have such a thing at all. You're just a selfish human. Your malice is filled with the desire to monopolize a person, and all kinds of dirty thoughts. Without me, do you think you're still so pure? The unkind Yumaqian. Was he still the Yumaqian? Was he still the man that Weiwei liked? Yumaqian knew that he was being malicious, and was trying to sow discord. But he was struck by the uneasiness in his heart. He was actually incomplete. He had always shown his best side to Weiwei, because his malice had been absorbed by Fountain Pen. Without Fountain Pen, he could not be as pure as he was at the beginning. The malicious Yumaqian desperately egged him on. Put down your finger and give up resistance. I won't hurt your girl. I like her so much that I can't bear to hurt her. Yumaqian sighed. If you didn't say that, I was going to give up. Now that you said it, we'll just die together. When he said that he liked her, Yumaqian admitted that he was jealous. When a jealous man became fierce, he would even kill himself. Chapter 1741. After speaking, Yumaqian's black eyes turned cold, and he pressed his fingers against his forehead. He planned to perish together with his evil self. He didn't have much time left to control his body. He had to completely kill his evil self before he lost control. Even if the price was to die together. You're crazy, you're crazy. You endured 100 years of loneliness and pain and couldn't bear to die. Now you want to die just like that. And it was for a woman? The evil soul in his body felt a terrifying force coming from his forehead. This was Yumaqian using all of his soul's strength to commit suicide. The evil soul was squeezed until it was about to explode. He immediately said angrily, Yumaqian, if you dare to destroy this body, I'll put all of your evil intentions towards Weiwei on her. Yumaqian said, You don't have a chance. I don't have a chance either. The evil soul didn't have a chance to hurt her. The kind soul also didn't have a chance to protect her. They both didn't have a chance. The evil soul was driven crazy by the power of suicide. He hardened his heart and escaped from Yumaqian's body. Yumaqian could go die by himself. He could still live even without a body. But just as he escaped from Yumaqian's body, a pair of hands covered in blood grabbed his soul. He looked up and saw Weiwei's cold smile. I finally caught you, stupid pen. I'm waiting to break you in half. I'm waiting for your blood to run dry. Yumaqian also moved his fingers away from his forehead. Although his body was on the verge of collapse, it didn't look like his life was in danger. That kind of power couldn't be retracted. He could only die. Yu Pen felt like he had been tricked. Weiwei's blood was the power to restrain Yin Qi. She held onto the evil soul so tightly that it couldn't escape at all. Yumaqian's talismans that were floating in the air madly attacked and stuck to the malicious soul. The peachwood sword in the eye of the formation also emitted a faint light, activating the entire ghost-catching formation. Everything worked together perfectly. Yumaqian's eyes had turned completely black, and the strange red color had completely disappeared. His face was cold and solemn. Using the last of his strength, he said in a low and deep voice, Break. The yellow talisman burst into flames. Just as the burning yellow talisman was about to burn Weiwei's fingers, Yumaqian had already hugged her and pulled her away. He allowed that malicious soul to be wrapped in the yellow talisman and burned. The malicious soul roared. That roaring sound made people shudder. The remaining half of the school building also began to silently collapse. Yumaqian remained expressionless as he hugged Weiwei from behind. His hand gripped the wound on her wrist tightly to stop the blood from flowing out. His body was already cold, but Weiwei, who had lost too much blood, was even colder. Yumaqian's breathing was a little broken. His half-closed eyes were filled with pain. Weiwei seemed to sense his pain. Her voice was a little weak. You're back, brother, you? Yumaqian's mind was in a mess. Some of those memories were also shattered, but memories of her were still clear and bright. His voice was incomparably heavy. Next time, if there's a next time, just kill me. Don't force yourself to death like this. She was practically using her own life to force him to death. If he didn't wake up in time, and failed to seize the body, what would she do? Would she really die with him? No, at that time his soul would scatter, and she would become a ghost, controlled by her evil self. The full articles, the downloads, the S. Chapter 1742. They still couldn't meet. Yumachian really wanted to scold her to death, but when the words reached his mouth, he could only repeat, "Don't be like this in the future, don't be like this." Weiwei Bai's head started to feel dizzy, and the effects of the life support system were weakening. She was almost completely exhausted as she laid in his arms. She leaned her head against his chest and revealed a nonchalant smile. "Then don't be like this in the future either. You're being controlled by some random ghost, and you need a rookie like me to save you." Yumachian picked her up, but when he heard her words he paused. Did she think that he was being possessed by an evil ghost? Yumachian was silent for a moment, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He also didn't explain that the so-called evil ghost possession was actually more of an outbreak of his own evil thoughts that couldn't be suppressed. It was all his fault. The evil spirit under the yellow talisman began to weaken, but a part of the black fog still escaped. The black evil will wanted to escape from the array, but the array was designed to capture Qi. It couldn't escape. The evil spirit turned around fiercely and saw Yumachian staggering as he carried Weiwei Bai, wanting to walk out. Once Yumachian left, it would be completely finished. It was clearly a part of him, so there was no reason to let him live alone. The evil spirit dispersed, turning into wisps of gas thinner than silk, and then silently burrowed into Yumachian's body. Yumachian was so weak that he didn't notice. But when the evil spirit entered his body, the cold made his pupils shrink. He immediately turned around and found that the yellow talisman had been burned out, and the evil spirit's soul had also been destroyed. But that cold feeling just now. Yumachian's eyes showed vigilance, but his body didn't allow him to delay any longer. His body was now human, and so was Weiwei Bai. They were so weak that it wasn't suitable for them to stay here. Outside the array, a bunch of ghosts were fleeing everywhere. When he saw Yumachian carrying Weiwei Bai out, he immediately knelt down in fear. He had lived under the influence of the fountain pen for so long. For a moment, these ghosts had no intention of resisting. Yumachian looked at the ghosts coldly and walked out step by step. He needed to get to the hospital quickly. Weiwei Bai couldn't take it anymore. However, he did not notice that a thin red mist had appeared in the depths of his eyes. It was both fragile and enchanting. Weiwei Bai felt that she would have become a dry corpse if it weren't for the life support. The amount of blood she lost could kill her several times over. She struggled to open her eyes and saw Yumachian sleeping beside her. His forehead was bandaged, and his wrists were also bandaged. The system saw that she had woken up. "You were in the hospital." The male lead had a few broken ribs. The doctor told him to lie down, but he didn't listen. "You've lost too much blood, but you'll be fine after a blood transfusion." Weiwei Bai looked at Yumachian's calm face as he slept. Lying down like this, who could tell that he had broken bones? The broken bones in his body must have been broken by the suicidal force when he wanted to die together with the malicious Yumachian. The system said, "Oh right, the favorability is at 80. Tian was amazing. The favorability rose quickly and smoothly. There was no need for Weiwei Bai to do anything else. This time, Weiwei Bai's self-mutilation made this man sad for a long time. The favorability was also abused. Bai Weiwei reached out and rubbed her temples. Her face was still pale. "Where's Yu Pen?" The system said, "He's dead. But there are still some traces of malice in the male lead's body. When the male lead wakes up, he'll be fine." Chapter 1743. Weiwei Bai lay back down. The blood loss made her feel like her limbs were floating in the air, like she could fly away at any moment. She lay on her side and quietly looked at Yumachian. His lying posture was very restrained. It seemed like he didn't press on his wound. His hair was short, black and soft falling under his eyes, making his fragile pale skin look even more tender. A body that had slept for 100 years. It was still at the age of 18. Delicate and full of youthful spirit. Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while before reaching out to touch his hair. The temperature of his hair was lower than normal people's, and it was also very soft. It was as comfortable as touching a cat in a fridge. Wei Wei Bai touched him, and then closed her eyes to sleep. A tired body needed sleep to replenish itself. And she had just fallen asleep. Yu Maqian opened his eyes. He had just woken up. But when she touched him, he didn't dare move. He was afraid of disturbing this incomparably gentle action. He reached out to touch his hair. It was the touch of a human's body. It was like he could feel the warmth of her fingertips. Yu Maqian couldn't help but smile. Ding! The male lead's affection has increased to 82. System. Kill by touching the head. This can increase the affection. The two patients stayed in the hospital for a few days. They were officially discharged. Yu Maqian's personality was like a ghost. It didn't change at all. It was very gentle and mature. His body's recovery ability was also very strong. His bones could actually grow back in a short period of time. If it wasn't for the fact that they didn't check again, the doctor would have been scared to death. After leaving the hospital, Yu Maqian took Wei Wei Bai to a hotel. He also tried to learn how to use the computer and made an appointment with an agent online. He watched Wei Wei Bai eat leeks and pig liver to replenish her blood. He said to her, "I'm going to look at a house first. What kind of house do you like?" Wei Wei Bai ate while frowning. "You want to buy a house?" Yu Maqian saw that her lips were stained with food sauce, so he took a tissue and wiped it off for her. "Yes. Otherwise, when we get married in the future, it will be too much for you to not have a house." In this era, the requirements for men were actually lower than before. Some men only needed to pay a down payment to set the house as the standard for marrying a wife. This was almost unimaginable in his time. No matter how poor a man was, he had to pay for his own house, even if it was a tile-roofed house. Yu Maqian had plenty of ways to earn money. After all, he had so many abilities of the Heavenly Tao sect, which were all resources. He had no real job at the moment. The blessings and lifespan in his hands were more than enough for him to buy a house and marry a wife. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a moment before her face suddenly turned red. She lowered her head and said, "You can decide. I don't care if there's no house." Yu Maqian looked at him with a gentle expression. His heart felt warm. He was trying to make himself look like he belonged in her era. During this period of time, he spent almost every day on the internet, absorbing the knowledge of young people. He knew that some girls had high expectations for their men. If he saw a post praising his girlfriend for being sensible and gentle, everyone would want them to be forever. Forever might be short for forever happy. Yu Maqian felt that he and Wei Wei Bai could be happy forever. She was so gentle, cute, and beautiful. In Yu Maqian's eyes, Wei Wei Bai was practically glowing. Beauty was in the eye of the beholder. Angels could be seen in the eye of the beholder. Yu Maqian set up a ghost door and an alarm outside the hotel room. Then he went to look at the house. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1744. Wei Wei Bai continued to rest, playing games and reading novels. Her beautiful days of idling were here again. The agent accompanied Yu Maqian to look at 3 houses. From beginning to end, the agent was grinning from ear to ear. This was because Yu Maqian's request was for the house to be big, bright, and expensive. This request was the golden customer that the agent dreamed of. In the end, Yu Maqian chose a house with good feng shui. It would take some time to complete the procedures, and his ID card was still drawn. As a human, he lacked the sharpness of a ghost. However, he was still proficient in the necessary scamming techniques. The agent was as happy as a 200-pound orange cat. He immediately pulled Yu Maqian. "Brother, you're so young and promising. Your girlfriend will definitely be happy to see this house. I'll treat you to a meal." Yu Maqian originally thought that Wei Wei Bai was still in the hotel. However, he heard the agent say, "I'm getting married soon, and I've already bought a wedding ring. We're really fated." When Yu Maqian heard this, he was silent for a moment before asking humbly, "Wedding ring? What kind of wedding ring do girls like? The agent. The bigger the diamond, the better. I mean, it depends on the brand and design. Yumachian shamelessly asked. Then, other than a wedding ring, what else do I need to buy? The agent pulled this big customer. Let's talk while we eat. Let me tell you, girls like nothing more than a romantic proposal ceremony. Yumachian immediately followed him. A proposal ceremony? He didn't care about this before. Before marriage, men and women couldn't even meet. While eating, Yumachian asked the agent a lot of questions about proposals. In the end, he was satisfied. The agent poured him some wine. Yumachian didn't think much about it. Questions at the table had existed since ancient times. He didn't drink too much, afraid that Wei would dislike him for drinking too much. This kind of worry made him feel happy and satisfied. After all, he only felt that he wasn't alone when someone despised him. After bidding farewell to the agent, Yumachian quickly returned to the hotel. The security of the hotel was not triggered at all. When he returned to the room, he saw that Wei was still asleep. She was fine. Yumachian stood by the bed and looked at her for a while. Her sleeping appearance was soft and cute. He wanted to lower his head and kiss her, but he remembered that he smelled of alcohol. So he went to take a shower first. Yumachian took off his clothes and took a shower. Halfway through the shower, he started to feel dizzy. The smell of alcohol was making him feel uncomfortable. It had been too long since he had been a human, so all the human reactions seemed unfamiliar to him. Yumachian reached out and pinched the bridge of his nose. He sighed. He knew that he was a little drunk. He casually put on a bathrobe and walked out. When he saw Wei on the bed, his heart softened. Yumachian got on the bed. Just as he was about to reach out and hug her, his vision went black, and he was in a trance for a few seconds. A thick blood-red color appeared in his eyes. Yumachian took a deep breath and knew that something was wrong with him. He immediately rolled off the bed and staggered out. But halfway through, Wei seemed to sense someone and opened her eyes in a daze. Brother you. Yumachian's body stiffened. His eyes were still red. He said softly, Yes, Wei. Wei asked, What's wrong with you? Yumachian's body stiffened. The terrifying and crazy thoughts in his body kept tearing at his shaky mind. He said softly, It's nothing. I just took a shower. I was afraid that I would wet you. Wei jumped off the bed and rushed over to hug him. The sudden contact almost made Yumachian break down. His lips trembled and the redness in his eyes deepened. This was the malicious bigotry that made him unable to control himself. He could feel the temperature of the girl's skin behind him. Her slightly disorderly breathing was especially ambiguous and seductive in the night. Yumachian did not dare to reveal the slightest bit of evil. He could control this crazy malice that was out of control and would hurt her. Yumachian did not want her to see his sinister expression at all. Wei-Bai's face was pressed against his back. She said sleepily, Why are you drying yourself here? Go to bed and sleep. Don't treat me like an outsider. Yumachian said in a muffled voice, Yes, okay. He resisted the urge to hurt her and reached out to turn off the lights. In the dark, his bloodshot eyes would not be discovered. He then turned around and saw Wei-Bai in her pajamas, yawning barefooted. His breathing became more disorderly. He carried her to bed and covered her with a blanket. He then lay down obediently, afraid that he would not be able to control himself and not dare to get close to her. Wei-Bai did not care about anything. She rolled over and threw herself into his arms like a cat. Yumachian was so scared that he trembled 3 times. What to do? He couldn't control her anymore. Wei-Bai muttered, Brother you, do we have enough money for the house? Yumachian held back. Yes, it's enough. How could a man say that it wasn't enough? Of course it was enough. Wei-Bai lazily said. You have to tell me if it's not enough. We'll pay the down payment, and then we'll pay the loan together. Yumachian was stiff for a long time before he softly said, I can support you, so you don't need to worry. Wei-Bai did not like to hear this. She said in a daze, I can also work hard to support you. All of Yumachian's evil thoughts were suppressed by her soft promise. The night was long and his eyes returned to black. Even his eyes were a bit dry. He lowered his head and leaned against her head as he lightly said, Okay. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 85. Transmigration system, male god come here. Transmigration system, male god come here. / transmigration system, male god come here. Transmigration system, male god come here. At the bottom to record this reading. Transmigration system, male god come here, comma. Chapter 1745. When Weiwei woke up, she saw Yumaqian sitting on the floor. He was meditating with his legs crossed, and there was a pile of yellow talismans on the floor. There were strange eyes drawn on the yellow talismans. He slowly opened his eyes, and his gaze was deep. Rise! All the yellow talismans with eyes on them stood up from the floor. Yumaqian waved his hand casually. Come back quickly. The yellow talismans flew up and left the room through the crack in the door. His expression was calm, and then he heard the breathing of someone behind him. He turned around and saw Weiwei lying on the bed, looking at him obediently. What are you doing? Yumaqian heard her and was curious. He couldn't help but touch her hair and smiled. Nothing, I'm just trying out some spells. After all, my body has been asleep for too long, and my hands are rusty. I need to practice. Weiwei believed him and turned to the system. Tongzi, where did those yellow talismans go? The system said. They went to find Yusanqian. The male lead plans to start his revenge. The system wasn't a pushover. It would gladly accept anyone who tried to pinch it. The current Yumaqian took care of his own good and evil. He didn't have much kindness, and now he didn't have any. When Weiwei heard that it had nothing to do with her favorability points, she let go. 3 years less than a year. Her favorability points were 85. Because of Yu Tian, she had a comfortable life in this world. She was afraid of ghosts and he caught ghosts. There was a villain like Yumaqian, but there was nothing wrong with Yumaqian's brain. After being tricked once, he definitely wouldn't jump into Yusanqian's trap again. So she could continue to get the remaining favorability points by being a white salted fish. It was a comfortable plane. She was so lucky that she managed to get a normal man. Weiwei sighed. If only every plane had a man like Yu Tian in the future. The system said. That's a low probability event. I'm just afraid that things will go in the opposite direction. For example, Yu Tian in this realm is very beautiful. But in the next realm, she'll give you an even scarier target. Weiwei's luck was very bad. Therefore, it was rare to be able to step on a gentle target. Don't you see those crazy targets of the past appearing in droves? There weren't many normal people. Even if it was normal, it would not be normal after provoking Weiwei. It was rare for Yu Tian to be so comfortable. The system was really afraid that her luck would run out. Weiwei's expression turned ugly. No, I feel like I've been through a lot. Today, there's Yu Tian, and in the future, there will always be Tian. The system said. I wish you all the best. Weiwei, why does this blessing sound like a curse? Yumaqian saw that Weiwei was still in a daze. So he reached out to take a talisman and stuck it on her forehead. Weiwei had just woken up from her tiredness and drowsiness, but a gust of fresh wind like the wilderness woke her up. She blinked and heard Yumaqian say, Get up, wash up, eat, and then we'll start class. Weiwei, what class? Yumaqian, catching ghosts and drawing talismans. Weiwei, I'll learn how to draw talismans, not? Yumaqian stuck a talisman on her lips. There's no such thing as a student choosing a class, you have to learn. She was in such a daze, but she had such a good physique for catching ghosts. It would be a waste not to teach her. Yumaqian decided that he would not let her be as lazy as a dead salted fish. Weiwei could not open her mouth, so she could only glare at Yumaqian. Yumaqian, if you look at me again I'll kiss you. / Chapter 1746. Weiwei immediately looked away. Yumaqian's face flashed with disappointment. Then he reached out to take off her talisman. Before Weiwei could react, he lowered his head and pecked her lips. Then he waved his hand, and all the scattered yellow talisman papers flew up and returned to his hand. He said, I'll go see if breakfast is here. Weiwei covered her mouth and was silent for a moment. Was it an illusion? Yu Tiantian seems a bit overbearing. The system said. Men are all like that to their women. Wei Wei Bai said. You're not a man, how do you know so much? The system said. Do you want me to take off my pants to prove my gender? Wasn't it just doing the system's job? Because it was a system, it couldn't even show its gender? Wei Wei Bai said. Forget it, bean sprouts are short toothpicks, you won't be able to see them even if you take them off. The system. This was even more vicious than if it wasn't a man. After Wei Wei Bai and Yu Maqian finished eating, Yu Maqian took her to learn how to catch ghosts. He pointed at the radio building. Did you see that woman in white upstairs? How could she not see it? That white-clothed ghost was the female ghost that Yu Maqian had pointed out to her to scare her in the beginning. If there was no special reason, these ghosts would not leave the place of death until the obsession disappeared and the soul dispersed. That female ghost in the radio building seemed to have a really deep obsession. She was still on the verge of collapsing on the roof. Not only was she on the verge of collapsing, but she was also staring at the ground below with bloodshot eyes. Then, when Wei Wei Bai was not prepared, the female ghost jumped off the building. After jumping off, the female ghost lay on the ground with her limbs broken. A pool of blood flowed out. It was extremely terrifying. What was even more terrifying was that the female ghost lay on the ground for a while, then stood up with her limbs twisted, and slowly climbed up to the roof. Just like the previous jumping incident, this female ghost had nothing to do every day, so she jumped off the building. Wei Wei Bai touched the back of her hand and felt goosebumps. She immediately hugged Yu Maqian. No, I'm not going. Yu Maqian smiled. He reached out his hand to her back, and followed her back to her waist. He grabbed her waist and carried her towards the building. It's fine. This ghost is just average. I'm here. How flirtatious. However, when Wei Wei Bai was being pushed forward by Yu Maqian, she didn't find it seductive at all. The female ghost in white stood on the rooftop. Wei Wei Bai was standing right in front of her. The man and the ghost glared at each other. Yu Maqian gave her a talisman and gently said, just walk over and stick it on her face. Wei Wei Bai held the yellow talisman in her hand. She thought of all the scenes she had experienced. She was just a shadow, just a ghost. It was indeed a little ugly. However, she still looked like a human. She couldn't be that scary. Besides, there was still Yu Maqian. Wei Wei Bai prepared herself mentally, and tried her best to overcome the shadow in her heart. Her fingers trembled violently, as she stuck the yellow talisman on the female ghost's body. That face was really too ugly. Wei Wei Bai just wanted to stick it on her clothes as a token of appreciation. As for why the ghost asked her to stick it on, it was because Yu Maqian had tied her up so that she couldn't move. When the talisman was stuck on, the female ghost screamed and spat out black blood. The black and smelly liquid was disgusting. Wei Wei Bai jumped back a few steps, and didn't get splashed by the blood. Yu Maqian helplessly supported his forehead with his hand, and snapped his fingers. The female ghost instantly turned into black fog and disappeared. A good talisman could kill a ghost as long as it was stuck on her face. Chapter 1747. She had to stick to his clothes, so the effect was slow. Yu Maqian tapped by Wei Wei's head with his finger. You can only eat and wait for death in this life. You can't kill ghosts like this. Wei Wei Bai covered her head, then looked up and smiled. How can I catch ghosts when you're here? Just help me catch them. Yu Maqian, if I'm not here. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes. You're here even if I'm not here. That was weird. It was also sweet. Yu Maqian didn't think too much about it. He just thought that her smile was cute, and her words were cute. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 88. Favorability was too easy to get. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to being abused, said, there won't be any melodramatic events that will cause the favorability to drop to 0 again, right? If it happened again, Wei Wei Bai said that she definitely wouldn't be able to handle it. The system, unless there's a car accident. It was already so melodramatic that he lost his memory. What else could it be? Would he lose his memory again? Wei Wei Bai heard and felt relieved. Yu Maqian definitely wouldn't get into a car accident. The car would be the one that got into a car accident. Yu Maqian looked at Wei Wei Bai, who who was like a piece of rotten wood that couldn't be carved, and thought of a plan to teach this stupid student. It seemed like he could only make a cage, throw her in, and then find dozens of the scariest ghosts to put by her side. Once she got used to it, it would be fine. Yumachian's eyes started to redden. If she still couldn't get used to it, that would be even better. She would hug him and cry. She looked really good when she cried. Yumachian's thin lips slowly curved. His smile had traces of greed as he kissed her on the side of her face. It was as if he was kissing a dessert that made people sink into it. Wei Weibai looked at him strangely. Yumachian's expression was very calm as he said, "Let's go down." Wei Weibai reached out and touched the side of her face. She felt that when he kissed her just now, it was a little sticky. Was the tip of his tongue sticking out? Wei Weibai sighed. He was indeed a man. Even Yu Tian would lick people like a big bad wolf when they were familiar with each other. However, this kind of method was too overbearing and clingy. It was not in line with Yumachian's character. Yumachian held her hand. When he turned around, his expression changed. A trace of intense fluctuation flashed through his eyes, and his muscles even tensed up. He silently suppressed those evil and dark thoughts. These were all the obsessions that had escaped into his body when his malice had been destroyed. He would be affected, but he would definitely not be controlled by these malicious intentions. As long as he could endure for a period of time, he would be able to completely dispel these malicious thoughts. The redness in Yumachian's eyes was hidden again. The bloody color did not disappear, waiting for the day when it would sweep over again. When they returned to the hotel, Yumachian suddenly looked up. A yellow talisman with an eye drawn on it drilled out of the gap. He grabbed it and crushed it. Some images rushed into his mind. He found Yu Sanqian. Yu Sanqian was still looking for Wei Weibai. Yumachian smiled coldly. He was simply courting death. Although some of his memories were fragmented and blurry, because of the fight with the fountain pen earlier. But the matter of Yu Sanqian wanting to kill Wei Weibai, he firmly remembered it in his heart. He did not dare to forget. Yumachian did not tell Wei Weibai about these things. Instead, he stayed by her side very naturally. He accompanied her to eat, watch movies, and finally, when she was sleepy, he tucked her in. "Go to sleep." Yumachian kissed her forehead. Chapter 1748. Wei Weibai felt that Yumachian's kiss had become normal again. There was no sticky feeling. She nodded. When she closed her eyes, she whispered, "I'll wait for you here. Come back soon." Yumachian's gentle expression stiffened. She knew he was going out. Wei Weibai pulled up the blanket. "I'm going to sleep." She covered her face with the blanket, revealing a pair of bright black eyes. A few strands of hair were sticking up, making her look very cute. Yumachian nodded. "I'll be back soon. Don't leave this room." Wei Weibai yawned. "Got it, naggy old uncle." He was over 100 years old. He couldn't be any older. Yumachian felt a bit helpless. He really didn't know what to say about age. After all, the age difference was too big. Yumachian raised his hand to open the gate of ghost and directly entered. After a while, he seemed to think of something. He leaned out of the gate of ghost and took out a large bunch of spider lilies. "For you." He placed the flowers by her pillow and then went back in with a red face. The gate of ghosts silently closed and disappeared from the room. At the same time, the notification of the favorability rating sounded. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 90. Wei Weibai looked at the spider lilies beside her ear and finally said, "Tongzi, it's so sweet." The system chewed on the malt candy and was stuck to its teeth. It mumbled, "It's so sweet." Yu Sanqian's expression darkened. "Can't find him." The disciples trembled, not daring to make a sound. Yu Sanqian stood up with his hands behind his back. With a dark expression he said, "Yumachian is dead. Wei Weibai shouldn't have any protection. How could the Yu family's ghost warding technique fail? A person with a pure young body was the easiest to find. This was because such a person's body was like a small sun in the eyes of ghosts. You can see it no matter where you hide. However, Wei Weibai seemed to be suppressed by something. There was no light of the little sun. She disappeared into the sea of people and could not be found at all. The disciple said, "Indeed, we can't find it. Martial uncle, we've even used divination, But there's a huge force that makes us unable to continue. They had tried every means possible to find him. It was as if there was a barrier around Wei Bai. Not a single trace of aura was revealed. Yu Sanqian held back his anger and waved his hand. Leave. Now is not the time to punish them. The most important thing for him was to find Wei Bai. Therefore, the more disciples the better. The disciples who thought they would be punished felt relieved and immediately left. Seeing that everyone had left, Yu Sanqian picked up the cup on the table and smashed it on the ground. Day and night, he suffered the pain of being torn apart by vengeful spirits. He had clearly found the best pure young body. But the person was lost. Yu Sanqian frowned. Could it be that Yu Maqian was still here? That was impossible. His soul had dissipated right before his eyes. However, Wei Bai's method of hiding was too advanced. The more Yu Sanqian thought about it, the more scared he became. He immediately walked into the Yu clan's treasury. There were all kinds of precious items in the treasury. Among them, there was a bronze mirror that was as tall as a person. The ancient mirror of prophecy. This mirror had two functions. One was to evoke the deepest greed in people's hearts. The other was to make prophecies. The more powerful the person who activated the mirror was, the more effective it would be. With Yu Sanqian's ability, he could only activate the ancient mirror for 1 minute. Moreover, it might not be accurate. Fortunately, the ancient mirror could limit the questions. He solemnly used a special technique to activate the ancient mirror, then asked, Wei Bai's whereabouts, Yu Maqian's life or death? For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full article. https://www.sashu.com for the full article. https://www.sashu.com for the full article on com for the full article, comma. Chapter 1749. After asking, the mirror rippled open. His figure appeared in the mirror, and there was another person standing behind him. At first, Yu Sanqian thought that this was a prophecy from the ancient mirror. However, a prophecy required some time. It couldn't have happened so quickly. By the time Yu Sanqian reacted, he felt a chill on his chest. A peachwood sword had pierced through his chest, and blood spurted out. Yu Maqian stood quietly behind him, holding a peachwood sword in his hand. The tassels on the sword were as red as blood. When he came in, he saw his peachwood sword on the wall. When he raised his hand, the peachwood sword automatically returned to his hand. Yu Sanqian opened the ancient mirror. Yu Maqian appeared behind him without a sound. What did he mean by beating him to the ground and nagging him with a bunch of nonsense? Yu Maqian wasn't interested in such things. He saw Yu Sanqian stab him to death with his sword. Yu Sanqian reached out, wanting to grab his weapon. Yu Maqian moved his finger, and the body of the man under his feet began to change. A terrifying black aura appeared on Yu Sanqian's body, binding him. The ghosts that kept his body alive tore at his flesh. Yu Maqian looked down at him coldly. His finger moved again. Yu Sanqian finally saw what was on Yu Maqian's finger. It was hair. Yu Sanqian spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked down and saw that the hair sewn into his body was being torn out by Yu Maqian, strand by strand. He was being torn apart by the ghosts before he died. Yu Maqian didn't even give him a chance to beg for mercy. He sealed his mouth and watched as he died tragically. Yu Sanqian's body turned into a pile of tattered flesh and began to disappear. 100-year-old body couldn't withstand such torment. Yu Maqian expressionlessly took out a talisman and scattered it. Small ghosts appeared and carried away the remaining corpses. From now on, there was no more Yu Sanqian in this world. There was no longer an enemy that could threaten Wei Bai. Yu Maqian let out a sigh of relief. He casually looked up, only to see that the ancient mirror had been reactivated. Yu Sanqian was dead, and the ancient mirror had been reactivated. However, it might have sensed Yu Maqian's presence, so it was activated again. Yu Maqian knew what this thing was for. He had used it before, but it was completely useless for complex prophecies. He couldn't be bothered to use it. Ripples appeared in the mirror, and the ripples began to calm down. Then a strange picture appeared. A cold cage was placed in a luxurious and comfortable room. A young girl was curled up in a cage. Her hands were wrapped around her knees, and her head was lowered quietly. Yumachian saw at a glance that it was by Weiwei. She seemed to have fallen asleep. Her sleeping face was cute and quiet. As if she sensed that someone was looking at her, her thick eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. Yumachian knew that the ancient mirror had the ability to evoke the evil desire in a person's heart. He wanted to take a few steps back and not look at the mirror. It would cause the mirror's effect to lose its effect. However, the moment Weiwei opened her eyes, he lost all strength to escape. Her eyes weren't pure, nor were they cunning. Instead, they were languid and hazy, with a seductive beauty. She tilted her head, reached out a finger, and gently placed it on her lips. She didn't look delicate. Instead, she looked seductive. Yumachian knew that he was obsessed with evil, but he didn't know that it was so filthy. His breathing became heavy, but he saw Yui standing in the cage, looking down at her body. Then she slowly took off her clothes. Yumachian took a step back, his eyes trembling. He looked down at the ground, not daring to raise his head. However, a scarlet color appeared in his eyes. https://www.sashu.com/ full text. https://www.sashu.com/ download text. https://www.sashu.com mobile text. https://m.sashu.com/ for the convenience of your next reading. You can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1750. She was his to begin with. Whatever he did to her, it was natural. When this thought came, Yumachian felt that it was simply vicious, but it was like a poison that took root in his mind. Suddenly he heard a panting sound. This sound was charming to the bone, but it was more powerful than a knife, causing Yumachian's face to turn pale. He clenched his hands into fists, and his knuckles were so tight that his outline could be seen. Suddenly, a pair of warm hands came from behind him, and the naked Weiwei was already wrapped around his body. "Do you like me?" she asked softly. Yumachian wanted to nod, but he lost all his strength. He knew that he had fallen into the power of the ancient mirror, and this was all an illusion. Her fingers were soft and white, and her body was warm and seductive, like a seductive spirit. No matter where he ran, he couldn't escape her temptation. Yumachian bit his lips tightly, and felt that his skin was about to explode. His fingers nervously clenched, and he wanted to release them several times, but he didn't succeed. He clearly knew that this was an illusion. How could he keep falling into it? This was a low-level illusion. It wasn't difficult for him to undo it. But Yumachian stood in place blankly, allowing this illusion to surround him. The persistence of those evil thoughts in his heart finally grasped his weakness, causing him to be unable to escape, and could only be entangled by the dark and paranoid malice. This malice didn't dissipate with time. Instead, it used Yumachian's body and his love for Weiwei to grow and grow. The more he cared, the more he liked. The more dark thoughts and undetectable worries there were. And these negative energies were the nutrients for the malice. Yumachian could even hear countless voices in the depths of his heart, encouraging him. She was his, so he could do whatever he wanted. She was willing, so he didn't offend her. Yumachian's fingers loosened, and his eyes were as beautiful as flames, like a red spider lily burning in the abyss. He reached out and placed his hand on the back of her hand that was hugging his waist. Little by little, his fingers moved upwards. This action was very gentle. Like a feather, it lightly brushed past. However, this action was very domineering. His fingers were holding her wrist in a restraining manner. "Yumachian, hug me." Weiwei's voice came from behind. That charming and sweet call could make people sink into hell and return to heaven. Yumachian knew that this illusion was becoming more and more realistic as he indulged himself. He was in a daze for a moment and couldn't help but turn around. He pulled her hand and pressed her against his chest. Under Weiwei's thick eyelashes, her eyes were bright. Her coquettish face was not as delicate and cute as usual. However, it was exceptionally moving. Yumachian's voice also lowered. The you in my heart is simply blasphemous. Although men would always have some unrealistic thoughts about the girl they liked. But he was different from those men. An ordinary man might have such a thought, but it would dissipate on its own. But he wouldn't. Instead, it would accumulate into a terrifying malice hidden in the depths of his heart. If he hadn't destroyed the huge malice of the fountain pen, he probably wouldn't have the ability to pretend to be a gentle big brother now. Yumachian sneered. Although the current him could still pretend to have no desires and be gentle and affectionate. However, the darkness in his heart had accumulated too much. In the past, he had the fountain pen to suppress it. Now, he didn't dare to use the power of the fountain pen. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 1751. He was afraid that the pen that absorbed his malice would form a consciousness again and come to snatch his body. After all, his malice now was not a murderous aura, loneliness and despair. Instead, it was an obsession with a person. That consciousness had only appeared for a short while. And the thought of killing Weiwei Bai had transitioned to liking her and tormenting her in less than 10 minutes. If his malice was allowed to form a consciousness again, at that time, Weiwei Bai's biggest enemy was no one else. It was him. Weiwei Bai had a dazed look on her face. She did not understand his words at all. She took the initiative to kiss him. Yumachian only felt that her taste was like a tempting poison. He could not help but reach out to touch her hair and deepen the kiss. This was an illusion. He could not fall completely. He warned himself in his heart. But he could not get rid of such a sweet illusion. Under the cold moonlight, he slowly hugged her. She obediently lay in front of him. Her hair fell through the gaps between his fingers. His breathing became chaotic and heavy. Her posture also changed. From pure to flirtatious and unrestrained. Every action was seducing him. Yumachian's eyes were frighteningly red. His back was arched, his muscles were tense, and hot sweat appeared on his forehead. Weiwei Bai's warm breath blew by his ear. Brother Yu, can I be with you forever? Yumachian's eyes became blurred. His thin lips trembled, and in the end he sighed. You know, that's what I want. Be together forever. That was actually what he wanted. He still retained his greatest sense of insecurity in his malice. After all, forever was too long. He was afraid that Weiwei Bai would not like him and leave halfway. Weiwei Bai laughed softly. It would be strange if I don't leave you. Her voice turned cold, causing Yumachian's chest to hurt. The blurred look in his eyes disappeared instantly. He quickly looked up. Only then did he realize that he was still standing in front of the mirror. And there was no image on the mirror. He was drenched in cold sweat as he gasped for breath. A mirror could bring out the things that a person most desired and feared. Yumachian's fingers trembled as he covered his face. He had just experienced what he wanted the most, and what he was most afraid of. Get her, lose her. Yumachian's breathing was disorderly for a long time, before he could barely suppress the discomfort in his chest, and return to normal. Yusantian was dead. The Tiandao sect would be in chaos for a while. During this time, he and Weiwei Bai would go somewhere else to live in seclusion. Yumachian put away the peachwood sword. This was one of the most precious treasures of the heavenly Dao sect. But it was more of a possession of his. He took it back with a clear conscience. Yumachian's footsteps were still weak. He turned around and wanted to leave. However, he suddenly thought of something and stopped in his tracks. He turned around and looked at the mirror. The mirror also had the effect of prophecy. Although complicated prophecies could sometimes be wrong, sometimes they were very accurate. Yumachian looked at the mirror with a gloomy expression for a long time, before he hesitantly reached out and opened the ancient mirror again. A ripple appeared on the ancient mirror. He pressed his fingers on the mirror and asked softly, "Can Yumachian and Weiwei Bai be together forever?" The mirror was silent. This question took too long to answer, so the mirror didn't have the ability to answer. Yumachian didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Just as his fingers were about to leave the mirror, two words appeared on the mirror. No. Yumachian's fingers stiffened and his expression turned cold. It wasn't necessarily correct. The mirror wasn't necessarily correct. Yumachian convinced himself, But he couldn't help but ask, why? Why couldn't they be together forever? And read at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1752. The mirror's answer was especially fast this time. The mirror shook violently. The surface of the mirror even cracked because of overuse. Yumachian saw an image appear in the mirror. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were calm as she hugged him, but her voice was very sweet and gentle. We will be together forever. His reflection in the mirror was smiling very happily. It could even be seen that he was very excited. Was this their wedding? Wei Wei Bai was wearing a white wedding dress. Yumachian looked at this scene strangely, because Wei Wei Bai's eyes in the mirror were too calm. Even her smile, in a place where he couldn't see, was unusually cold. Yumachian stared at the mirror. When they separated, the expression on Bai Weiwei's face changed in an instant. From indifference to happiness, it only took 0.1 seconds. His reflection in the mirror didn't notice anything. He handed a bouquet of flowers to her. Then I'll go out and arrange the wedding first. You can rest now. Wei Wei Bai tiptoed and kissed his face. She said with a smile, Got it, Nagi uncle. It was too real. This wasn't an illusion. In the illusion, she was the amalgamation of his evil thoughts. Her personality was even wanton and bold. But the Bai Weiwei in the prophecy in the mirror, her every move was like the real her. Wei Wei Bai saw him walk out. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. She said softly, I can leave now. This sentence was said lightly, as if she could leave him. It was a very happy thing for her. After saying this, she turned and left. There was no trace of love in her eyes. In fact, her expression was one of relief. It was as if leaving him was a very happy thing. Her figure slowly disappeared in the ancient mirror. And the ancient mirror also shattered. It shattered under Yumachian's feet piece by piece. Yumachian stood in the same place for a long time. The cold moonlight elongated his shadow. It was as if the deepest darkness was constantly expanding. Wei Wei Bai was awakened by the sound of thunder. She saw the heavy rain outside the window, and calmly closed the window. Then she went to the bathroom. When she came back, she lay on the bed, and was about to pull up the blanket. A flash of lightning lit up the room. A figure sat quietly by the bed. Wei Wei Bai's first reaction was, did she see a ghost again? But the next moment, she recognized Yumachian and sighed in relief. Brother Yu, you're back. In the darkness, Yumachian looked at her with a deep and strange gaze. Examining and cold. Bai Weiwei, who had been in a state of muddling along and waiting to die. At this moment, the vigilance in her body erupted. She had a blank face, but many guesses flashed through her mind. What happened to Yumachian? Was he possessed again? Did he have amnesia? Or was he possessed? His eyes were fucking twisted and sick. It was no different from those sickly, delicate, and psychopathic targets that she had met before. He seemed to have noticed the change in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. Yumachian slightly narrowed his eyes. He unhurriedly touched his finger. There was an extra ring on his finger. The ring was very simple. It was bare and had no embellishments. There were only a few incantations on it. Wei Wei Bai suppressed all her vigilance and naturally got up. She reached out and hugged his waist. She rested her head on his lap. Maybe it was because she was sleepy, but her voice was a little hoarse. What time is it? It was a very intimate action. Yumachian hesitated for a moment. Then he reached out and touched her hair. He said softly, It's 3 a.m. I'm going to take over the position of the head of the Tiandao sect. Chapter 1753. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Didn't he say he was going to live in seclusion? Why was he suddenly taking over the position of sect leader of the natural law school? Yumachian didn't seem to notice her surprise. He said calmly, I killed Yu Sanqian. I reported his crimes and his condition to the elders of the school. I am a disciple of the natural law school who has come back to life, so the position of successor still exists. He did exist, but he had to take over the position of sect leader of the natural law school. It was almost impossible, but he had a very high status after he woke up. Yu Sanqian was dead. He was the person with the highest status in the natural law school. Although he was an elder, those elders were actually his juniors. His bloodline had been identified by the selection system of the natural law school, so no one could doubt his identity. After he killed Yu Sanqian, he didn't want to cause so much trouble, but after stepping on the mirror fragments, he directly went to the main hall of the natural law school and rang the bell of an important event. Old Zhong had special restrictions. Only the successor of the natural law school and above could ring the bell. Everyone was startled awake. He directly sat in the main hall. After everyone gathered, he announced that he was the sect leader of the natural law school. Yes, he directly announced that he would suppress the rebellion. He killed people, collected souls, passed the selection system of the school, and finally obtained the position of sect leader. In just an hour or so, he said that he washed the entire natural law school with blood. It was almost like a nightmare. The remaining people who obeyed him were scared out of their wits and directly knelt down. The natural law school didn't need to kneel, but when people were extremely scared, their legs would go soft. The ring on his finger was the symbol of the sect leader of the natural law school. The position of sect leader of the natural law school came 100 years late. Yu Maqian was as indifferent as a pool of stagnant water. He didn't feel excited at all. All that was left was a sense of crisis that had nowhere to go. Was the prophecy of the mirror wrong? Or was it true? The ancient mirror's prophecies were often wrong. But when Yu Maqian saw the prophecy, he felt a great sense of panic. What if it was true? There was only a 1 in 10,000 chance that it was true. Then he came to a conclusion that made him completely collapse. Wei Weibai didn't love him. Then on the day of the wedding, she would leave him completely. Yu Maqian gently stroked her soft hair. His eyes were dark and abnormally cold. He whispered that he had no choice but to accept the position of the head of the natural law school. Therefore, they needed to go to the natural law school. They even promised that they would leave and live in seclusion after some time had passed. Wei Weibai listened indifferently, but she was arguing with the system. Yu Maqian, what's going on? The system was sleeping soundly just now, so how could it not know that the male lead was perverted? It glanced over. Wasn't the male lead quite good? Wei Weibai said, you have to trust my intuition. There's something wrong with him. The system rubbed its eyes and flipped through the information. It's okay. The male lead in this world is very gentle. Where is its data? Why is its data stuck? No, it's just stuck. Why is it all blank? Why did Yu Maqian go to the natural law school? Why isn't my data saved? Wei Weibai asked. Is he being maliciously controlled again? The system glanced at the male lead and found no signs of maliciously controlling him. It looked at the data it lost because it fell asleep. How to explain this? The system felt that nothing major would happen in this world. The favorability didn't drop either. Chapter 1754. Thus it calmly said, nothing's wrong. Everything is normal. Wei Weibai was speechless. She should have trusted the system, but there was a strange feeling in her heart that made her feel uneasy. She looked up at Yu Maqian. She found that Yu Maqian's expression was gentle, and there was nothing wrong with his eyes. Was she worrying too much? She controlled her expression and didn't reveal anything wrong. Then she closed her eyes and said, Sect Master, do I get paid? Yu Maqian's fingers paused, and he smiled. Yes, I can afford to raise you. Not only was there a salary, there was also a pile of things that could restrain one's soul. Yu Maqian's eyes reddened. He closed his eyes and suppressed the redness. Then, he opened his eyes again and said with a smile, in the future, you will also be the sect master's wife. Wei Weibai muttered, what wife? You haven't proposed yet. Yu Maqian originally wanted to say that he had already done a lot of research on proposals. He had also thought a lot about the proposal ceremony, but he thought that once they got married, she would leave. The ancient mirror's prophecy was like a terrifying shackle that made his lips tremble. If he didn't propose, he wouldn't get married. Then wouldn't she have to stay by his side and never leave? Yu Maqian was silent for a long time before saying, can I propose now? Wei Weibai looked up, but she didn't know how to react. He proposed just like that. This efficiency was too fast. Yu Maqian picked her up, opened the gate of ghost, and directly walked in. Wei Weibai didn't even have time to react. They had already walked out of the gate of Ghost and arrived at an unfamiliar place. It was decorated in an ancient style with all kinds of talismans. It was both gorgeous and strange. Yumachian said, "This is the Heavenly Tao sect." Wei Bai nodded, but didn't reveal any strange emotions. Instead, she was a little excited and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Are you planning to propose to me in the home where you were born?" Yumachian nodded, turned around, and walked in front of a door covered in yellow talismans. The door was unusually heavy. Yumachian said softly, "Machian." A few yellow talismans turned into small figures and quickly pushed the heavy door. Inside was a huge circular hall. The hall was densely packed with memorial tablets and wooden tablets. An extremely gloomy atmosphere made by Wei Wei's hair a little numb. Yumachian's expression was extremely calm as he walked in. The door slowly. The innate vigilance in Bai Weiwei's heart began to appear again. She couldn't help but smile. But the system said everything. Moreover, the favorability didn't change at all. But where was the source? Yumachian put Bai Weiwei down. They stood in the middle of the hall filled with memorial tablets. Yumachian waved his hand, and a fountain pen appeared in his hand. He waved the pen in the air, and all the ink flew out. He had been suppressing and sealing this thing of great luck for hundreds of years. Now that he had undone the seal, he had completely used up the power of the pen. He drew a special formation. When the system saw the male lead draw a formation, it flipped through the information to see what he had drawn. The formation fell to the ground. It was a dark color, and no power could be seen. But Yumachian knew that those simple lines had used up all of the pen's condensed luck. The pen in his hand lost its luster, turned into dust, and disappeared into his hand. Yumachian Jin's expression was still gentle, and his eyes didn't change at all. He held Wei Wei Bai's hand. "Wei Wei, will you marry me?" Wei Wei Bai felt that something was wrong, but she was very familiar with marriage proposals, so she naturally answered, "Okay." Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m. Sashu.com. Chapter 1755. You won't die from a proposal. Yumachian smiled like a child. Then he lowered his head and bit her fingertip. He bit the skin and blood seeped out. He bit his finger as well, and blood appeared as well. He fused the blood of the two people together. Wei Wei Bai felt that this scene was indescribably strange. However, Yumachian had always been normal. If he wasn't being controlled, he wouldn't hurt her. It was rare to have such a gentle male lead. Wei Wei Bai was still deep in thought when the system's voice sounded. "Host, run." "Wei Wei Bai, run?" The system said. "Yumachian wants to sign a soul contract with you." Wei Wei Bai said. "What?" The system said. "Did you forget about the cultivation plane? Once a soul contract is involved, you can't leave this plane." Wei Wei Bai said. "Why would Yumachian suddenly want to sign this thing with me? Both of them. Was a soul contract a piece of cake? How could they sign it just like that?" The system said. "Let's stop it first." Wei Wei Bai knew that if the system said so, it must be true. She couldn't care less about the flaws. She saw that Yumachian was about to drop the blood in the middle of the formation. She immediately reached out and grabbed his hand, stopping the blood. Yumachian paused and looked up at her. Wei Wei Bai said immediately, "This proposal is too unromantic. You should at least find a bright place to propose. Who proposes in front of a pile of memorial tablets?" Yumachian stood still for a moment before nodding slowly. "You're right. This place is not good." Wei Wei Bai said with a smile. "You should at least prepare flowers when proposing." Yumachian said, "I'll make it up to you in the future. This place has the most spiritual energy. If we become one here, our soul imprints will be the same for all eternity. You won't be able to leave me." This reason was so straightforward that Wei Wei Bai couldn't reject it. She saw him and pried her fingers apart. However, the drop of blood on his finger was still bright. He was about to drip his blood in. Wei Wei Bai's mind flashed with countless ways to stop him, but none of them were not abrupt. The system said, "It doesn't matter if you're suspected, or if your favorability drops. Let's leave this place first." He was imprisoned in the plane. It was a very dangerous thing. Wei Wei Bai knew that for the system to say this much, it must be very dangerous. She stealthily moved away, and tried her best to come up with a clumsy excuse in her heart. Then, she naturally yelled without any pretense, "Ghost!" Yumaqian was shocked. She took the opportunity to run out. She left the array and came to the door. She reached out and pushed the door open. The door didn't move at all? Wei Wei Bai heard the footsteps, but they were neither fast nor slow. She turned around and showed an annoyed smile. "Are your ancestors still wandering around here? I just saw their ghosts." She pretended to be afraid of ghosts, and got through this first. Yumaqian's back was facing the dark candlelight, and the sound of the storm could be heard faintly outside the door. His deep eyes seemed to be burning with a ball of colorful fire, which was even more eye-catching in the darkness. He walked in front of Wei Wei Bai and slowly lowered his head. His breathing gradually became heavier, but his breath was suppressed. It was like the storm outside the door, violent and suppressed. He said softly, "The ghost you saw, was it me?" The light from the lightning illuminated his red pupils. His red eyes were filled with a heavy and desperate madness, but his voice was strangely calm. "Wei Wei, you don't actually like me, right?" As long as she believed in him and loved him, then what he said just now, that their souls could be together forever, she would only accept it happily, not turn around and run away. He was here. How could she be afraid of ghosts? Even if she saw a ghost, she knew that the place she should hide was behind him, and not escape to the door. Yumaqian didn't want to believe that prophecy. He didn't believe it at all. Everything he did tonight was just to test the waters. If she lied to him a little longer and didn't run away, he would believe her sincerity and not really bind their souls together. Because the process of binding souls was very painful. He couldn't bear to see her in so much pain. He thought that if they loved each other, they would go to hell and reincarnate 100 years later. Two people could still be together if they waited for each other. There was no need to bind their souls. But what if she didn't like him from the beginning? Would he not be able to wait for her, because she would abandon him? Yumaqian's voice was as gentle as a murmur. "How could I forget your job? You're a liar. Did you plan to trick me to help you catch ghosts, protect you, and give you money to spend from the beginning?" She said she was a liar. He didn't believe it. Now he believed it. She wasn't just good at lying, she was also good at lying to ghosts. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but frown. She didn't have time to think of a way to deal with the sudden turn of events. Yumaqian reached out to touch her face, so gentle that it made her hair stand on end. The next moment, he grabbed her and threw her into the middle of the array. Wei Wei Bai fell to the ground and was a little dazed. The next moment, her neck was grabbed by Yumaqian. His eyes were red and his expression was cold and desperate. "Don't you know that a marriage proposal requires a union? This is the secret marriage technique passed down in our Tian Dao sect for generations." The array was strengthened by the Tian Dao sect, and the power was strengthened by the fountain pen. The power of the contract was witnessed by the ancestors. It was useless for her to regret, because even if she died, her soul could only stay by his side as a ghost. Bai Weiwei reached out and grabbed his wrist, trying to save her precarious credibility. He smiled. "Don't lie in the future, because you might meet a madman like me who will love you for a lifetime even if I know you're a liar." Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 93. Chapter 1756. Wei Wei Bai had no idea how she had screwed up. She did not reveal any flaws. She still had basic confidence in herself. But Yumaqian had a look of certainty. His gaze was so ruthless. He did not suspect her for no reason. He was very sure that she had no feelings for him. In the past, the system would at least remind her a little. She always had a chance to fool it if she reacted quickly. But now, she screwed up just like that. This accident happened too suddenly. No matter how good her brain was, it was impossible for her to find the reason so quickly and calmly pacify Yumaqian. She was about to call the system, but she heard the sound of her clothes tearing. Her whole body stiffened. Under the torn clothes was her trembling body. Yumachian's fingers clasped her shoulders. His eyes were cold, and there was a look of desperation in his eyes. He lowered his head and bit her neck, just like a fierce ghost. At this moment the system, it was blocked. What if the host wanted to sign a soul contract? Being left in this plane was not a joke. When the time came, both the system and the host would be done for. 3 years. Once the 3 years were up, both the system and the host would have to leave if there was no special reason. If they did not leave, would they wait for the main system to erase them? In the previous plane, it was because the side mission was stuck. In the end, Weiwei stayed because of the side mission. A lifetime. For many raiders, this was a very normal time. That was because the time was set from the beginning. But the system and Weiwei were different. Their time was not set for a lifetime. If they were forced to stay in this plane for a lifetime, and not be erased, except for the reversal of fate and the tampering of fate. The system's expression turned ugly. That flawed product with the reversal of fate. Damn! Could it be because of this that Yumachian had the ability to sign a soul contract? Otherwise, even if it was just the power of the pen, Yumachian's ability was not enough to overpower the system's power. It allowed him to successfully sign this contract with Weiwei. Last time, the immortal cultivation plane was different because it was a different plane. After all, in the immortal cultivator's plane, the power to move mountains and overturn seas was infinitely close to the power of the system. As long as he gave it his all, there was still a chance to capture the conqueror. And this time, the power of the plane couldn't be compared to that of the cultivation plane. The system immediately started rummaging through the drawers. Now it could only weaken the power of the soul contract. If he was really forced to stay here for the rest of his life, in that case it could only be for a lifetime, not for eternity. Yumachian, that ruthless person, once he made a move, he would never let you go even if you turned into a ghost. He would insist on entering the bridge of helplessness with you. The system gritted its teeth and clenched its fists. There were no tools to weaken the power of the contract. The supermarket was also closed. The only thing it had left was its own power. The system raised its hand, and a red flame appeared in its palm. It had a bitter expression on its face. Sigh. How many snacks did it have to eat to recover this little bit of strength? After thinking for a long time, the system silently took back some of its power. There was a high probability that it could stay in this plane for a lifetime. After all, it had a cheat artifact that could reverse the luck. Even if there was no reason to stay, the main system wouldn't say anything, let alone hurt the host and it. So it weakened the soul contract to a lifetime. Of course, it could also weaken to 3 years before leaving. But the power required was too much, so it pretended that it didn't have this option. Otherwise, it would have to spend more money to buy snacks. Chapter 1757. However, the host might dissolve this soul contract. After all, the host was so good at acting. Who knows? Yumachian's heart might soften if she were to act coquettishly or cry. The optimistic system rubbed its chin and thought. But how did the host screw up? What was the information in that card? It was really curious. Weiwei didn't know what the system was thinking about. Her mind was spinning quickly. She couldn't let the combination succeed. She couldn't sign this damn soul contract. If it succeeded, she couldn't go back. She reached out and grabbed Yumachian's hair, saying with a trembling voice, "Yumachian, stop it. Are you crazy? Are you being possessed again?" Her voice was innocent and anxious, even afraid. Yumachian's eyes were swept by her soft short hair, and he felt a little sour. He said softly, "Be good, don't lie to me." He thought she liked him. Excluding the experience of being a ghost for 100 years, he was just a teenager with a special job. He had never been in love, and he had never liked girls. This was the first time he met a girl who liked him. He was immersed in her love. But he didn't know that there were people in this world who treated love as a game. When she turned and ran just now, she didn't hesitate at all. She didn't like him. It wasn't Gu Jing who told him. It was when she turned and left when she heard that they would live together forever. He saw clearly that she didn't want to be with him forever. Not to mention eternity. Yumachian thought about how he wanted to keep up with her in this era. He kept going online to learn what girls liked. It wasn't that he hadn't seen the problem of being green on the forum, or that his love had disappeared, or that he had been scammed by immortals. But he just skimmed through it and didn't think much about it. He didn't know that he would meet a love liar. Wei Bai felt his breathing become heavier, and the uneasiness in her heart grew. She knew that Yumachian was too shocked. A favorability level of more than 90 was the hottest stage of a relationship. At this stage, if she didn't coax him well, Yumachian might strangle her to death. Wei Bai tried to suppress her chaotic breathing. She had to get through this first. She tried to maintain a calm rhythm, and tried to communicate with Yumachian. It was definitely impossible to say that she loved him to death now. She could only pretend to be scared. I really saw a ghost. Regardless of whether he believed it or not, he had to slow things down first. Once his rhythm was disrupted, and he was confused for a while, it would help him calm down. Wei Bai tried her best to calm Yumachian down. If she didn't calm down, she would be left in this plane forever. What was more frightening was that the system had once said that there was no reason to stay in a plane. Once the time was up, all kinds of ways to die would be waiting for her. Once the 3 years were up, if she stayed here, would she be struck to death by the thunder flower style, hit to death by a car cycle, or scared to death by all kinds of ghosts? The main system was so annoying. She thought that was a terrible way to die. What was even more frightening was that he couldn't leave even if he died. Becoming a ghost and continuing to be tortured by the main system. That scene was too tragic. She sympathized with herself for a minute. Yumachian stopped moving. He was lying on top of her, as if he was worried that he would hurt her. His legs were bent, and his body was only gently pressing down on her. He didn't raise his head. His face was pressed against her shoulder, and his rough breathing sounded in her ear. He seemed to be enduring, and his muscles were terrifyingly tense. Do you still see ghosts now? He seemed to believe her reason for running away, and his voice became gentler. // Chapter 1758. Wei Bai didn't dare to let her guard down. She even felt that this was more like the calm before the storm. She tried her best to show weakness. No, aren't you here? As she spoke, she took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck and gently patted his back with her fingers. It was a comforting and reassuring action. Wei Bai tried her best to prevent Yumachian from losing control of his emotions. She didn't want things to get to a point of no return. Because she was thinking of countermeasures, her eyes were unusually cold. But what she didn't know was that although Yumachian was lowering his head, however, his blood-red pupils were like a mirror, reflecting the yellow talisman on the ground. This talisman had no other function. It was just a mirror. A special mirror. A special array formation that could reflect Wei Bai's expression. Wei Bai seemed to feel that he had calmed down, and her eyes softened. She even deliberately lowered her voice. What's wrong with you? Is there a problem with your body again? If there's a problem, we can face it together. How could I not like you? From cold to soft, it didn't take half a second. Even her voice and words were like a poison that was specially set for him. He simply couldn't refuse to be forced down by her, and was willing to be poisoned to death by her. If it wasn't for the mirror, would he have been deceived by her like this until he died? No, even if he died, would he still think that she loved him? What a happy lie. So happy that he couldn't wait to die with her. What was more vicious than ghosts was indeed the human heart. What was more terrifying than loneliness was actually love. Yumachian slowly closed his eyes, and the tears in his eyes fell into her hair. Wei Bai felt a little wet on her neck. She was restrained by Yumachian and couldn't move. She couldn't see Yumachian's expression, but Yumachian was moved to tears by her words. This was impossible. It had been a long time since she had encountered such a passive situation. This plane was too lazy, and too lazy. They had lost the necessary vigilance, which was why they were so confused when they overturned. A trace of uneasiness appeared in her eyes, but her hand was still gently stroking his back. In the middle of the night, there was an oppressive cold atmosphere. Suddenly she heard a sigh. Then, she heard Yumachian's gentle voice. I believe you. I was too impulsive. I shouldn't have scared you like that. Yu Tiantian came back. Wei Wei Bai's expression relaxed. Just as she was about to say something, her pupils suddenly shrank. Yu Maqian grabbed her hand and pinned her to the ground. At the same time, sharp thorns appeared on the ground and pierced through the back of her hand. They pierced through her palm and into Yu Maqian's palm. A thorn pierced their clasped hands at the same time. The blood in their hands flowed out, mixing and flowing out. Soon, the patterns of the array were dyed red. Bai Weiwei wasn't prepared for his sudden attack. The pain made her tremble all over, and her lips lost their color in an instant. Yu Maqian had already raised his head. His eyes were as red as a wild beast's. He curled his lips and revealed a gentle smile. You must like it when I say that. Unfortunately, I lied to you. You lied to me. I lied to you. His movements were not as gentle as before, afraid that he would crush her. Instead, he tightened the strength in his arms, and the aura on his body became cold and strong. Yu Maqian's eyes were still sad, but his expression was cruel. Is at https://www.sashu.com// that you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.